I am just so unprepared right now. I always lately, like whenever I'm about to go live, I like suddenly remember like, oh man, yeah, I forgot to like post about this on Twitter. I'm going live. So I actually have to do that right now. I didn't want to like keep it on the starting screen for too long because I know people have very prominently complained about that. So I figured it was like, also this fire sound is too loud. Hello. Hello King Kuro. How you doing? How are things going? Okay, let me just do this in the background real quick. Paste the link. Oh, the typing is probably very loud. I'm sorry. Finishing The Shining. Send tweet. Okay. It seems like that's good. Oh, I also forgot to. I forgot to pour my tea. So let me do that real quick. Yeah, I just made this stuff. It's fresh tea. Freshly brewed. What common sense? I mean, I kinda... what kind? It's green tea with some, like, dried lemon peel and ginger. And I added some honey to it. And it's sitting on, like, a little, like, mug warmer, like, little burner plate sort of thing. So it just kind of, like, gets stronger as the night goes on. Which is good, because I'm gonna need it, because I'm actually gonna be reading quite a bit tonight. Because I have to get this... I have to get this goddamn book finished. I have to get it finished. Ah, it's still hot. Whew. Oh yeah, hello, Sanzo. Listen, I am not... I will deny all allegations of me being, like, promiscuous in any sort of way. Denying the allegations. Okay, where's my... I don't even have, like, the PDF pulled up right now. That's how unprepared I am. And also, I need to, like, remember which chapter I'm on. It's like, I think it was 39, wasn't it? I think. Let me just browse through here real quick. Yeah, I think, yeah, this is chapter 39. Yeah, so, last time, for the uninformed, because it seems like there are a couple new people here, basically, Jack Torrance is about to, like, go off the shits, and we're all just bearing witness. So, let me, like, take another sip of tea, and I think I could start reading. Okay. Well, okay, let's go. Wait, let me like take a sip of water too, just so I can like get my workings in proper order. Let's see. All right. Chapter 39, On the Stairs. One of the things they had sold to swell their liquid assets a little before moving from Vermont to Colorado was Jack's collection of 200 old rock and roll and R&B albums. They had gone at the wait, have I already? Oh, I did read this one. Shit, I forgot. Okay. Yeah, I remember this. Sorry. I forgot I already read that one. So it's chapter 40, I'm pretty sure. Let me see. Yep. It is chapter 40. Okay. Chapter 40, In the Basement. So we're skipping over all that other stuff I just read. The boiler, the goddamn boiler. The thought came into Jack Torrance's mind full blown, edged in bright warning red. On its heels, the voice of Watson. If you forget, it'll just creep and like as not you and your family will end up on the fucking moon. She's rated for 250, but she'll blow long before that now. I'd be scared to come down and stand next to her at 180. He'd been down here all night, poring over the boxes of old records, possessed by a frantic feeling that time was getting short and he would have to hurry. Still, the vital clues, the connections that would make everything clear, eluded him. His fingers were yellow and grimy with crumbling old paper, and he'd become so absorbed he hadn't checked the boiler once. He'd dumped it the previous evening around 6 o'clock when he first came down. It was now... He looked at his old watch and jumped up, kicking over a stack of old invoices. Christ, it was 4:45 in the morning. Behind him, the furnace kicked on. The boiler was making a groaning, whistling sound. He ran to it. His face, which had become thinner in the last month or so, was now heavily shadowed with beard stubble, and he had a hollow concentration camp look. The boiler pressure gauge stood at 210 pounds per square inch. He fancied he could almost see the sides of the old patched and welded boiler heaving out with the lethal strain. She creeps. I'd be scared to come down and stay next to her at 180. Suddenly, a cold and tempting inner voice spoke to him. Let it go. Go get Wendy and Danny and get the fuck out of here. Let it blow sky high. He could visualize the explosion. A double thunderclap that would first rip the heart from this place, then the soul. Oh my god, I left my phone off silent. Okay, there we go. That's fixed. The boiler would go with an orange-violet flash that would rain hot and burning shrapnel all over the cellar. In his mind, he could see the red-hot trinkets of metal careening from floor to walls to ceiling like strange billiard balls, whistling jagged death through the air. Some of them surely would whiz right through that stone arch, like the old papers on the other side, and they would burn merry hell. Destroy the secrets, burn the clues. It's a mystery no living hand will ever solve. Then the gas explosion, a great rumbling crackle of flame, a giant pilot light that would turn the whole center of the hotel into a broiler. Stairs and hallways and ceilings and rooms of flame, like the castle in the last reel of a Frankenstein movie. The flames spreading into the wings, hurrying up the black and blue twined carpets like eager guests, the silk wallpaper charring and curling. There were no sprinklers, only those outmoded hoses, and no one to use them. And there wasn't a fire engine in the world that could get here before late March. Burn, baby, burn. In 12 hours there would be nothing left but the bare bones. The needle on the gauge had moved up to 212. The boiler was creaking and groaning like an old woman trying to get out of bed. Hissing jets of steam had begun to play around the edges of old patches. Beads of solder had begun to sizzle. He didn't see, he didn't hear. Frozen with his hand on the valve that would dump off the pressure and damp the fire, Jack's eyes glittered from their sockets like sapphires. It's my last chance. The only thing not cashed in now was the life insurance policy he had taken out jointly with Wendy in the summer between his first and second years at Stovington. $40,000 death benefit, double indemnity if he or she died in a train crash, plane crash, or a fire. 7 come 11, die the secret death and win $100. A fire, $80,000. They would have time to get out. Even if they were sleeping, they would have time to get out. He believed that. And he didn't think the hedges or anything else would try to hold them back if the Overlook was going up in flames. Flames. The needle inside the greasy, almost opaque dial had danced up to 215 pounds per square inch. Another memory occurred to him, a childhood memory. There had been a wasp's nest in the lower branches of their apple tree behind the house. One of his older brothers, he couldn't remember which one now, had been stung while swinging the old tire Daddy had hung from one of the tree's lower branches. It had been late summer, when wasps tend to be at their ugliest. Their father, just home from work, dressed in his whites, the smell of beer hanging around his face in a fine mist, had gathered all 3 boys, Brett, Mike, and little Jackie, and told them he was going to get rid of the wasps. Now watch, he said, smiling and staggering a little. He hadn't been using the cane then. The collision with the milk truck was years in the future. Maybe he'll learn something. My father showed me this. He had raked a big pile of rain-dampened leaves under the branch where the wasp's nest rested, a deadlier fruit than the shrunken but tasty apples their tree usually produced in late September, which was then still half a month away. He lit the leaves. The day was clear and windless. The leaves smoldered but didn't really burn, and they made a smell, a fragrance. that echoed back to him each fall when men in Saturday pants and light windbreakers raked leaves together and burned them. A sweet smell with a bitter undertone, rich and evocative. The smoldering leaves produced great rafts of smoke that drifted up to obscure the nest. Their father had let the leaves smolder all that afternoon, drinking beer on his porch and dropping the empty Black Label cans into his wife's plastic floor bucket, while the two older sons flanked him and little Jackie sat on the steps at his feet, playing with his bolo bouncer and singing monotonously over and over, "Your cheating heart will make you weep. Your cheating heart is gonna tell on you." At 6:15, just before supper, Daddy had gone out to the apple tree with his sons grouped carefully behind him. In one hand, he had a garden hoe. He knocked the leaves apart, leaving little clots spread around to smolder and die. Then he reached the hoe handle up, weaving and blinking, and after 2 or 3 tries, he knocked the nest to the ground. The boys fled to the safety of the porch, but Daddy only stood over the nest, swaying and blinking down at it. Jack crept over to see. A few wasps were crawling sluggishly over the paper terrain of their property, but they were not trying to fly. From the inside of the nest, the black and alien place, came a never-to-be-forgotten sound. A low, somnolent buzz, like the sound of high-tension wires. "Why don't they try to sting you, Daddy?" he had asked. "The smoke makes 'em drunk, Jackie. Go get my gas can." He ran to fetch it. Daddy doused the nest with amber gasoline. "Now step away, Jackie, unless you want to lose your eyebrows." He had stepped away. From somewhere in the voluminous folds of his white underblouse, Daddy had produced a wooden kitchen match. He lit it with his thumbnail and flung it onto the nest. There had been a white-orange explosion, almost soundless in its ferocity. Daddy had stepped away, cackling wildly. The wasp's nest had gone up in no time. "Fire," Daddy had said, turning to Jackie with a smile. "Fire will kill anything." After supper, the boys had come out to I choked. After supper, the boys had come out in the day's waning light to stand solemnly around the charred and blackened nest. From the hot interior had come the sound of wasp bodies popping like corn. The pressure gauge stood at 220. A low iron wailing sound was building up in the guts of the thing. Jets of steam stood out erect in 100 places like porcupine quills. Fire will kill anything. Jack suddenly started. He had been dozing off, and he had almost dozed himself right into Kingdom Come. What in God's name had he been thinking of? Protecting the hotel was his job. He was the caretaker. A sweat of terror sprang to his hands so quickly that at first he missed his grip on the large valve. Then he curled his fingers around its spokes. He whirled it in 1 turn, 2, 3. There was a giant hiss of steam, dragon's breath. A warm tropical mist rose from beneath the boiler and veiled him. For a moment he could no longer see the dial, but thought he must have waited too long. The groaning, clanking sound inside the boiler increased, followed by a series of heavy rattling sounds and the wrenching screech of metal. When some of the steam blew away, he saw that the pressure gauge had dropped back to 200 and was still sinking. The jets of steam escaping around the soldered patches began to lose their force. The wrenching, grinding sounds began to diminish. 190, 180, 175. He was going downhill, going 90 miles an hour, when the whistle broke into a scream. But he didn't think it would blow now. The press was down to 160. They found him in the wreck with his hand on the throttle. He was scalded to death by the steam. He stepped away from the boiler, breathing hard, trembling. He looked at his hands and saw that blisters were already rising on his palms. Hell with the blisters, he thought, and laughed shakily. He had almost died with his hand on the throttle, like Casey the engineer in the wreck of the old 97. Worse still, he would have killed the Overlook, the final crashing failure. He had failed as a teacher, a writer, a husband, and a father. He had even failed as a drunk. But you couldn't do much better in the old failure category than to blow up the building you were supposed to be taking care of. And this was no ordinary building. By no means. Christ, but he needed a drink. The press had dropped down to 80 psi. Cautiously wincing a little at the pain in his hands, he closed the dump valve again. But from now on, the boiler would have to be watched more closely than ever. It might have been seriously weakened. He wouldn't trust it at more than 100 psi for the rest of the winter. And if they were a little chilly, they would just have to grin and bear it. He had broken 2 of the blisters. His hands throbbed like rotten teeth. A drink would fix him up. And there wasn't a thing in the goddamn house besides cooking sherry. At this point, a drink would be medicinal. That was just it, by God. An anesthetic. He had done his duty, and now he could use a little anesthetic. Something stronger than Excedrin. But there was nothing. He remembered bottles glittering in the shadows. He'd saved the hotel. The hotel won to reward him. He felt sure of it. He took his handkerchief out of his back pocket and went to the stairs. He rubbed at his mouth. Just a little drink, just one, to ease the pain. He had served the Overlook, and now the Overlook would serve him. He was sure of it. His feet on the stair risers were quick and eager, the hurrying steps of a man who has come home from a long and bitter war. It was 5:20 a.m. Mountain Time. And that's the end of chapter 40. Good Lord. My throat's already starting to sound kind of scratchy. And we only have I remember the chapter numbers going up until like the 50s. Actually, I could go back to the glossary because I can just go back with one click. How many chapters are there? Beep, 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 beep. I think I scrolled past it by accident. No, I must have not scrolled far enough. 58 is the last one, so we're really gonna have to like bend down the hatches here. Let me take another sip. Actually, I have some like I took some advice from last stream, and instead of olive oil, I have some melted butter, which should be a lot more appetizing to the palate. Let me get a little bit more. Just to make sure everything stays lubricated. And there we go. Now I'll just take like one more sip. Alright, here we go. Chapter 41, Daylight. Danny awoke with a muffled gasp from a terrible dream. There had been an explosion, a fire. The Overlook was burning up. He and his mommy were watching it from the front lawn. Mommy had said, "Look, Danny, look at the hedges." He looked at them and they were all dead. Their leaves had turned a suffocant brown. The tightly packed branches showed through them like the skeletons of half-dismembered corpses. And then his daddy had burst out of the Overlook's big double doors, and he was burning like a torch. His clothes were in flames. His skin had acquired a darkened and sinister tan that was growing darker by the moment. His hair was a burning bush. That was when he woke up, his throat tight with fear, his hands clutching at the sheet and blankets. Had he screamed? He looked over at his mother. Wendy lay on her side, the blankets up to her chin, a sheaf of straw-colored hair lying against her cheek. She looked like a child herself. No, he hadn't screamed. Lying in bed, looking upward, the nightmare began to drain away. He had a curious feeling that some great tragedy, fire, explosion, had been averted by inches. He let his mind drift out, searching for his daddy, and found him standing somewhere below, in the lobby. Danny pushed a little harder, trying to get inside his father. It was not good, because Daddy was thinking about the bad thing. He was thinking how good just one or two would be. I don't care. Sun's over the yard somewhere in the world. Remember how we used to say that, Al? Gin and tonic bourbon with just a dash of bitters, scotch and soda, rum and coke, Tweedledum and Tweedledee, a drink for me and a drink for thee. The Martians have landed somewhere in the world, Princeton or Houston or Stokely-on-Carmichael. Some fucking place after all. 'Tis the season and none of us are... Get out of his mind, you little shit! He recoiled in terror from that mental voice, his eyes widening, his hands tightening into claws on the counterpane. It hadn't been the voice of his father, but a clever mimic. A voice he knew. Hoarse, brutal, yet underpointed with a vacuous sense of humor. Was it so near then? He threw the covers back and swung his feet out onto the floor. He kicked his slippers out from under the bed and put them on. He went to the door and pulled it open and hurried up to the main corridor, his slippered feet whispering on the nap of the carpet runner. He turned the corner. There was a man on all fours halfway down the corridor between him and the stairs. Danny froze. The man looked up at him. His eyes were tiny and red. He was dressed in some sort of silvery, spangled costume. A dog costume, Danny realized. Protruding from the rump of this strange creation was a long and floppy tail with a puff on the end. A zipper ran up the back of the costume to the neck. To the left of him was a dog's or wolf's head, blank eye sockets above the muzzle, the mouth open in a meaningless snarl that showed the rug's black and blue pattern between fangs that appeared to be papier-mâché. The man's mouth and chin and cheeks were smeared with blood. He began to growl at Danny. He was grinning, but the growl was real. It was deep in his throat, a chilling primitive sound. Then he began to bark. His teeth were also stained red. He began to crawl toward Danny, dragging his boneless tail behind him. The costume dog's head lay unheeded on the carpet, glaring vacantly over Danny's shoulder. "Let me by," Danny said. "I'm going to eat you, little boy," the dog man answered. And suddenly a fusillade of barks came from his grinning mouth. They were human imitations, but the savagery in them was real. The man's hair was dark, greased with sweat from his confining costume. There was a mixture of scotch and champagne on his breath. Danny flinched back, but didn't run. "Let me by." "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," the dogman replied. His small red eyes were fixed attentively on Danny's face. He continued to grin. "I'm going to eat you up, little boy. And I'll start with your... Oh, why is that a thing? Why did he write that? I'm not even gonna repeat that, but like, why did he write that?" He began to prance skittishly forward, making little leaps and snarling. Danny's nerve broke. He fled back into the short hallway that led to the quarters, looking back over his shoulder. There was a series of mixed howls and barks and growls, broken by slurred mutterings and giggles. Danny stood in the hallway, trembling. "Get it up," the drunk dogman cried out from the corner. His voice was both violent and despairing. "Get it up, Harry, you bitch bastard. I don't care how many casinos and airlines and movie companies you own. I know what you like in the privacy of your own home. Get it up. I'll huff and I'll puff until Harry Derwent's all blown down." He ended with a long, chilling howl that seemed to turn into a scream of rage and pain just before it dwindled off. Danny turned apprehensively to the closed bedroom door at the end of the hallway and walked quietly down to it. He opened it and poked his head through. His mommy was sleeping in exactly the same position. No one was hearing this but him. He closed the door softly and went back up to the intersection of their corridor in the main hall, hoping the dogman would be gone. The way the blood on the walls of the presidential suite had been gone. He peeked around the corner carefully. The man in the dog costume was still there. He had put his head back on and was now prancing on all fours by the stairwell, chasing his tail. He occasionally leaped off the rug and came down, making dog grunts in his throat. Woof, woof. Wow, 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 wow. Grrr. These sounds came hollowly out of the mask's stylized, snarling mouth, and among them were sounds that might have been sobs or laughter. Danny went back to the bedroom and sat down on his cot, covering his eyes with his hands. The hotel was running things now. Maybe at first the things that had happened had only been accidents. Maybe at first the things he'd seen really were like scary pictures that couldn't hurt him. But now but now the hotel was controlling those things and they could hurt. The Overlook hadn't wanted him to go to his father. That might spoil all the fun. So it had to put the dog man in his way, just as it had put the hedge animals between them and the road. But his daddy could come here, and sooner or later his daddy would. He began to cry, the tears rolling silently down his cheeks. It was too late. They were all going to die, all three of them. And when the Overlook opened next late spring, they would be right here to greet the guests along with the rest of the spooks. The woman in the tub, the dog man, the horrible dark thing that had been in the cement tunnel. They would be... Stop that now. He knuckled the tears furiously from his eyes. He would try as hard as he could to keep that from happening. Not to himself, not to his daddy and mommy. He would try as hard as he could. He closed his eyes and sent his mind out in a high, hard crystal bolt. Dick, please come. We're in bad trouble, Dick. We need... And suddenly, in the darkness behind his eyes, the thing that chased him down the Overlook's dark halls in his dreams was there, right there. A huge creature dressed in white, its prehistoric club raised over its head. I'll make you stop it, you goddamn puppy. I'll make you stop it because I am your father. No! He jerked back to the reality of the bedroom, his eyes wide and staring, the screams tumbling helplessly from his mouth as his mother bolted away, clutching the sheet to her breasts. No, Daddy, no, no, no. And they both heard the vicious descending swing of the invisible club, cutting the air somewhere very close, then fading away to silence as he ran to his mother and hugged her, trembling like a rabbit in a snare. The Overlook was not going to let him call Dick. That might spoil the fun too. They were alone. Outside, the snow came harder, curtaining them off from the world. All right. Oh yeah, I've definitely earned that sip. For sure. For certain. All right. Oh boy! Now it's back to the hero of the story. In chapter 42, midair. Actually, let me like get some. Let me oil my throat. No, Jack isn't the hero in this story. He's like a neutral figure. Oh damn it, the butter's solidified. I need to like get some. Oh. I need to dip my hand in there a little bit. But I think I'm good now. Oh god. You can already like hear my voice. It's going out. It's going out so fast. Okay. Let me take one more sip. Okay. Chapter 42, midair. Okay. Oh, I was about to start, but then I had like a hiccup. Okay. Dick Halloran's flight was called at 6:45 a.m. EST. It still happened. And the boarding clerk held him by gate 31, shifting his flight bag nervously from hand to hand until the last call at 6:55. They were both looking for a man named Carlton Vecker, the only passenger on TWA's Flight 196 from Miami to Denver who hadn't checked in. Okay, the clerk said, and issued Halloran a blue first-class boarding pass. You lucked out. You can board, sir. Halloran hurried up the enclosed boarding ramp and let the mechanically grinning stewardess tear his pass off and give him the stub. "We're serving breakfast on the flight," the stew said. "If you'd like—" "Just coffee, babe," he said, and went down the aisle to a seat in the smoking section. He kept expecting the no-show Vecker to pop through the door like a jack-in-the-box at the last second. The woman in the seat by the window was reading "You Can Be Your Own Best Friend" with a sour, unbelieving expression on her face. Halloran buckled his seatbelt and then wrapped his large black hands around the seat's armrests and promised the absent Carlton Vecker that it would take him and the 5 strong TWA flight attendants to drag him out of his seat. He kept his eye on his watch. It dragged off the minutes to the 7 o'clock takeoff time with maddening slowness. At 7:05, the stewardess informed them that there would be a slight delay while the ground crew rechecked one of the latches on the cargo door. "Shit for brains," Dick Halloran muttered. The sharp-faced woman turned her sour, unbelieving expression on him and then went right back to her book. He had spent the night at the airport, going from counter to counter. United, American, TWA, Continental, Braniff. Never heard of that one before. Haunting the ticket clerks. Sometime after midnight, drinking his 8th or 9th cup of coffee in the canteen, he had decided he was being an asshole to have taken this whole thing on his own shoulders. There were authorities. He had gone down to the nearest bank of telephones, and after talking to 3 different operators, he had gotten the emergency number of the Rocky Mountain National Park Authority. The man who answered the telephone sounded utterly worn out. Halloran had given a false name and said there was trouble at the Overlook Hotel, west of Sidewinder. Bad trouble. He was put on hold. The ranger, Halloran assumed he was a ranger, came back on in about 5 minutes. "They've got a CB," the ranger said. "Sure they've got a CB," Halloran said. "We haven't had a Mayday call from them." "Man, that don't matter. Exactly what kind of trouble are they in, Mr. Hall?" "Well, there's a family. The caretaker and his family. I think maybe he's gone a little nuts, you know. I think maybe he might have hurt his wife and his little boy." "May I ask how you've come by this information, sir?" Halloran closed his eyes. "What's your name, fellow?" "Tom Staunton, sir." "Well, Tom, I know. Now I'll just be as straight with you as I can be. There's bad trouble up there. Maybe killing bad. Do you dig what I'm saying?" "Mr. Hall, I really have to know how you—" "Look," Halloran had said. "I'm telling you, I know. A few years back there was a fellow up there by the name of Grady. He killed his wife and his 2 daughters and then pulled the string on himself. I'm telling you it's going to happen again if you guys don't haul your asses out there and stop it." "Mr. Hall, you're not calling from Colorado." "No, but what difference? If you're not in Colorado, you're not in CB range of the Overlook Hotel. If you're not in CB range, you can't possibly have been in contact with the, faint rattle of papers, the Torrance family. While I had you on hold, I tried to telephone. It's out, which is nothing unusual. There are still 25 miles of above-ground telephone lines between the hotel and the Sidewinder switching station. My conclusion is that you must be some sort of crank." "Oh man, you stupid—" But this despair was too great to find a noun to go with the adjective. Suddenly, illumination. "Call them," he cried. "Sir? You got the CB, they have got the CB, so call them. Call them and ask them what's up." There was a brief silence, and the humming of long-distance wires. "You tried that too, didn't you?" Halloran asked. "That's why you had me on hold for so long. You tried to phone, and then you tried the CB, and you didn't get nothing, but you don't think nothing's wrong. What are you guys doing up there? Sitting on your asses and playing gin rummy?" "No, we are not," Staunton said angrily. Halloran was relieved at the sound of anger in the voice. For the first time, he felt he was speaking to a man and not a recording. "I'm the only man here, sir. Every other ranger in the park, plus game wardens, plus volunteers, are up in Hasty Notch, risking their lives because 3 stupid assholes with 6 months' experience decided to try the north face of King's Ram. They're stuck halfway up there, and maybe they'll get down, and maybe they won't. There are two choppers up there, and the men who are flying them are risking their lives because it's night here and it's starting to snow. So if you're still having trouble putting it all together, I'll give you a hand with it. Number 1, I don't have anybody to send to the Overlook. Number 2, the Overlook isn't a priority here. What happens in the park is a priority. Number 3, by daybreak, neither of those choppers will be able to fly because it's going to snow like crazy, according to the National Weather Service. Do you understand the situation? Yeah, Halloran had said softly. I understand. Now my guess as to why I couldn't raise them on the CV is very simple. I don't know what time it is where you are, but out here it's 9:30. I think they may have turned it off and gone to bed. Now if you... Good luck with your climbers, man, Halloran said. But I want you to know But I want you to know that they are not the only ones who are getting stuck up high because they didn't know what they were getting into. He'd hung up the phone. At 7:20 a.m., the TWA 747 backed lumberingly out of its stall, turned, and rolled out onto the runway. Halloran let out a long, soundless exhale. Carlton Vecker, wherever you are, eat your heart out. Flight 196 parted company with the ground at 7:28, and at 7:31, as he gained altitude, the thought pistol went off in Dick Halloran's head again. His shoulders hunched uselessly against the smell of oranges, and then jerked spasmodically. His forehead wrinkled. His mouth drew open in a grimace of pain. Dick, please come quick. We're in bad trouble, Dick. We need... And that was all. It was suddenly gone. No fading out this time. The communication had been chopped off cleanly, as if with a knife. It scared him. His hands, still clutching the seat rests, had gone almost white. His mouth was dry. Something had happened to the boy. He was sure of it. If anyone had hurt that little child... Do you always react so violently to takeoffs? He looked around. It was the woman in the horn-rimmed glasses. It wasn't that, Halloran said. I've got a steel plate in my head. From Korea. Every now and then it gives me a twinge. Vibrates, don't you know? Scrambles the signal. Is that so? Yes, ma'am. It is the line soldier who ultimately pays for any foreign intervention, the sharp-faced woman said grimly. Is that so? It is. This country must swear off its dirty little wars. The CIA has been at the root of every dirty little war America has fought in this century. The CIA and dollar diplomacy. She opened her book and began to read. The no smoking sign went off. Halloran watched the receding land and wondered if the boy was all right. He had developed an affectionate feeling for that boy, although his folks hadn't seemed all that much. He hoped to God they were watching out for Danny. All right, on to chapter 43. Hui. Only about 10 more chapters to go? I can only hope there's a couple in there where it's only a couple pages long and he only gave it its own chapter for the sake of emphasis. I can only hope. Oh yeah, I do need some more tea. Mine's getting cold and it's getting low. Just a second. Perfect. Okay, just one more sip. I need it hot. And maybe just a little bit more butter. It's already starting to harden again. I don't know why it's getting hard again so fast. Today's been the warmest it's been all week, I think. So, you know. Oh, that's some good butter. Usually, I mean, almost, I don't really eat straight butter unless it's with some bread nowadays. But back when I was younger, I used to just I used to take I used to take a spoon and get the butter out of the fridge. And I mean, it was margarine. It was in a tub. But I would get the margarine out of the tub, and I would just like get a spoonful, and I would just like eat that like plain as a snack. It was it was a little bit weird. Tea gets cold too fast. I hate cold tea. Yeah. Once it gets low enough, I think I'm gonna put it on the once the teapot gets low enough, I think I'm gonna put it on the I'm gonna put the teacup on the warmer instead. All right. There's some guy like revving his motorcycle in the distance. I'm pretty sure you guys can't hear that, but it's kind of annoying. All right, chapter 43. Drinks on the house. Jack stood in the dining room just outside the Batwing doors leading into the Colorado Lounge, his head cocked, listening. He was smiling faintly. Around him, he could hear the Overlook Hotel coming to life. It wasn't hard to say just how he knew, but I guessed it wasn't greatly different from the perceptions Danny had had from time to time. Like father, like son. Wasn't that how it was popularly expressed? It wasn't a perception of sight or sound, although it was very near to those things, separated from those senses by the filmiest of perceptual curtains. Actually, hold on a second. I need to get some lip balm, because I think my lips being dry is like making it worse. Maha Shoujo, hello. I'm just putting on some lip balm, because my lips are dry. And it's making me read worse. Ah. Okay. Here we go. It was as if another overlook now lay scant inches beyond this one, separated from the real world. If there was such thing as a real world, Jack thought, but gradually coming into balance with it. He was reminded of the 3D movies he'd seen as a kid. If you looked at the screen without the special glasses, you saw a double image, the sort of thing he was feeling now. But when you put the glasses on, it made sense. All the hotel's eras were together now, all but this current one, the Torrance era. And this would be together with the rest very soon now. That was good. That was very good. He could almost hear the self-important ding-ding of the silver-plated bell at the registration desk, summoning bellboys to chip to the front as men in the fashionable flannels of the 1920s checked in and out, and as men in fashionable flannels of the 1920s checked in, and men in fashionable 1940s double-breasted pinstripes checked out. There would be 3 nuns sitting in front of the fireplace as they waited for the checkout line to thin, and standing behind them, Natalie, dressed with diamond stick pins holding their blue and white figure ties, Charles Grandin and Vito Ginelli discussed profit and loss, life and death. There were a dozen trucks in the loading bays out back, some laid out one over the other, like bad time exposures. In the East Wing ball, I don't know what's going on with me. Yeah, I guess it's just real dry today. I don't know what's happening. There was like some dead skin on my lip. Okay, let's see. In the East Wing ballroom, a dozen different business conventions were going on at the same time, within temporal centimeters of each other. There was a costume ball going on. There were soirees, wedding receptions, birthday and anniversary parties. Men talking about Neville Chamberlain and the Archduke of Austria. Music, laughter, drunkenness, hysteria. Little love, not here, but a steady undercurrent of sensuousness. And he could hear almost all of them together, drifting through the hotel and making a graceful cacophony. In the dining room where he stood, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 70 years were all being served simultaneously just behind him. He could strike the almost. He could hear them, faintly as yet, but clearly. The way one can hear thunder miles off on a hot summer's day. He could hear all of them, the beautiful strangers. He was becoming aware of them as they must have been aware of him from the very start. All the rooms of the Overlook were occupied this morning. A full house. And beyond the bat wings, a low murmur of conversation drifted and swirled like lazy cigarette smoke. More sophisticated, more private. Low, throaty female laughter. The kind that seems to vibrate in a fairy ring around the viscera and the other places, which I can't say out loud. The sound of a cash register, its windows softly lighted in the warm half-dark, ringing up the price of a gin Ricky, a Manhattan, a depression bomber, a slow gin fizz, a zombie, the jukebox pouring out its drinkers' melodies, each one overlapping the other in time. He pushed the bat wings open and stepped through. "Hello, boys," Jack Torrance said softly. "I've been away, but now I'm back." "Good evening, Mr. Torrance," Lloyd said, genuinely pleased. "It's good to see you." "It's good to be back, Lloyd," he said gravely, and hooked his leg over a stool between a man in a sharp blue suit and a bleary-eyed woman in a black dress who was peering into the depths of a Singapore sling. "What will it be, Mr. Torrance?" "Martini," he said with great pleasure. He looked at the back bar with its rows of dimly gleaming bottles, capped with their silver siphons. Jim Beam, Wild Turkey, Gilbey's, Sherrod's Private Label, Toro, Seagram's, and home again. "One large Martian, if you please," he said. "They've landed somewhere in the world, Lloyd." He took his wallet out and laid a 20 carefully on the bar. As Lloyd made his drink, Jack looked over his shoulder. Every booth was occupied. Some of the occupants were dressed in costumes. A woman in gauzy harem pants and a rhinestone-sparkled brassiere. A man with a fox head rising slyly out of his evening dress. A man in a silvery dog outfit who was tickling the nose of a woman in a sarong with the puff on the end of his long tail, to the general amusement of all. "No charge to you, Mr. Torrance," Lloyd said, putting the drink down on Jack's 20. "Your money is no good here. Orders from the manager." "Manager?" A faint unease came over him. Nevertheless, he picked up the martini glass and swirled it, watching the olive at the bottom bob slightly in the drink's chilly depths. "Of course, the manager." Lloyd's smile broadened, but his eyes were socketed in a shadow, and his skin was horribly white, like the skin of a corpse. "Later he expects to see your son's well-being himself. He's very interested in your son. Danny's a talented boy." The juniper flames of the Jinhei were pleasantly maddening, but they also seemed to be blurring his reason. Danny? What was all this about Danny? And what was he doing in a bar with a drink in his hand? He had taken the pledge. He had gone on the wagon. He had sworn off. What could they want with his son? What could they want with Danny? Wendy and Danny weren't in it. He tried to see into Lloyd's shadowed eyes, but it was too dark. Too dark, like it was like trying to read emotion into the empty orbs of a skull. "It's me they must want, isn't it? I'm the one. Not Danny, not Wendy. I'm the one who loves it here. They wanted to leave. I'm the one who took care of the snowmobile, went through the old records, dumped the press on the boiler, lied, practically sold my soul. What can they want with him?" "Where is the manager?" He tried to ask it casually, but his words seemed to come out between his lips already numbed by the first drink, like words from a nightmare rather than those in a sweet dream. Lloyd only smiled. "What do they want with my son? Danny's not in this, is he?" He heard the naked plea in his own voice. Lloyd's face seemed to be running, changing, becoming somehow pestilent. The white skin becoming a hepatitic yellow, cracking. Red sores erupting on the skin, bleeding foul-smelling liquid. Droplets of blood sprang out on Lloyd's forehead like sweat, and somewhere a silver chime was striking the quarter hour. "Unmask, unmask." "Drink your drink, Mr. Torrance," Lloyd said softly. It isn't a matter that concerns you. Not at this point. He picked up his drink again, raised it to his lips, and hesitated. He heard the hard, horrible snap as Danny's arm broke. He saw the bicycle flying brokenly up over the hood of Al's car, starring the windshield. He saw a single wheel lying in the road, twisted spokes pointing into the sky like jags of piano wire. He became aware that all conversation had stopped. He looked back over his shoulder. They were all looking at him expectantly, silently. The man beside the woman in the sarong had removed his fox head, and Jack saw that it was Horace Derwent, his pallid blonde hair spilling across his forehead. Everyone at the bar was watching too. The woman beside him was looking at him closely, as if trying to focus. Her dress had slipped off one shoulder, and looking down, he could see her breasts were out. That's all I'm gonna say. Looking back at her face, he began to think that this might be the woman from 217, the one who had tried to strangle Danny. On his other hand, the man in the sharp blue suit had removed a small pearl-handled .32 from his jacket pocket and was idly spinning it on the bar, like a man with Russian roulette on his mind. He realized the words were not passing through his frozen vocal cords and tried again. I want to see the manager. Oh shit, I forgot to turn on. Oh shit, I forgot to turn on Sammy. Okay, I'm gonna have to like manually trigger that one. That's fine. Let me see. I'll do this real quick. There you go. I knew there was something I was forgetting. I want to see the manager. I don't think he understands. My son is not a part of this. Mr. Torrance, Lloyd said, his voice coming with hideous gentleness from inside his plague-rattled face. You will meet the manager in due time. He has, in fact, decided to make you his agent in this matter. Now drink your drink. Drink your drink, they all echoed. He picked it up with a badly trembling hand. It was raw gin. He looked into it, and looking was like drowning. The woman beside him began to sing in a flat, dead voice. Roll out the barrel, and we'll have a barrel of fun. Lloyd picked it up, then the man in the blue suit, then the dog man joined in, thumping one paw against the table. Now's the time to roll the barrel. Derwent added his voice to the rest. A cigarette was cocked in one corner of his mouth at a jaunty angle. His right arm was around the shoulders of the woman in the sarong, and his right hand was gently and absently touching her. He was looking at the dogman with amused contempt as he sang, "Because the gang's all here." Jack brought the drink to his mouth and downed it in 3 long gulps, the gin highballing down his throat like a moving van in a tunnel, exploding in his stomach, rebounding up to his brain in one leap, where it seized hold of him with a final convulsing fit of the shakes. When that passed off, he felt fine. "Do it again, please," he said, and pushed the empty glass towards Lloyd. "Yes, sir," Lloyd said, taking the glass. Lloyd looked perfectly normal again. The olive-skinned man had put his .32 away. The woman on the right was staring into her Singapore sling again. One breast was wholly exposed now, leaning on the bar's leather buffer. A vacuous crooning noise came from her slack mouth. The loom of conversation had begun again, weaving and weaving. His new drink appeared in front of him. "Muchas gracias, Lloyd," he said, picking it up. "Always a pleasure to serve you, Mr. Torrance," Lloyd smiled. "You are always the best of them, Lloyd." "Why, thank you, sir." He drank slowly this time, letting it trickle down his throat, tossing a few peanuts down the chute for good luck. The drink was gone in no time, and he ordered another. "Mr. President, I have met the Martians, and am pleased to report they are friendly." While Lloyd fixed another, he began searching his pockets for a quarter to put in the jukebox. He thought of Danny again, but Danny's face was pleasantly fuzzed and nondescript now. He had hurt Danny once, but that had been before he had learned how to handle his liquor. Those days were behind him now. He would never hurt Danny again. Not for the world. Chapter 44. Oh shit, I need to take a sip real bad. Ah, perfect. Let's see. How long's this one? Oh, this one's gonna be this one's gonna be it's gonna be a bit of a doozy. I gotta butter up the old vocal cords again. Okay. Actually, let me get like a little bit more just for good luck. I think I might have to take a break like mid-chapter to have another sip of tea, because this one's gonna be a long and indeed. Chapter 44. Conversations at the party. He was dancing with a beautiful woman. He had no idea what time it was, how long he had spent in the Colorado Lounge, or how long he had been here in the ballroom. Time had ceased to matter. He had vague memories. Listening to a man who had once been a successful radio comic, and then a variety star in TV's infant days, telling a very long and hilarious joke about incest between Siamese twins. Seeing the woman in the harem pants and the sequin bra do a slow and sinuous striptease to some bumping and grinding music from the jukebox. It seemed it had been David Rose's theme music from The Stripper. Crossing the lobby as one of three, the other two men in evening dress that predated the 20s, all of them singing about the stiff patch on Rosie O'Grady's knickers. He seemed to remember looking out the big double doors and seeing Japanese lanterns strung in graceful curving arcs that followed the sweep of the driveway. They gleamed in soft pastel colors like dusky jewels. The big glass globe on the porch ceiling was on, and night insects bumped and flittered against it. And a part of him, perhaps the last tiny spark of sobriety, tried to tell him that it was 6 a.m. on a morning in December, but time had been cancelled. The arguments against insanity fall through with a soft shirring sound / layer on layer. Who is that? Some poet he had read as an undergraduate? Some undergraduate poet who is now selling washers in Wausau? Or insurance in Indianapolis? Perhaps an original thought? Didn't matter. The night is dark, the stars are high, a disembodied custard pie is floating in the sky. He giggled helplessly. What's funny, honey? And there he was again, in the ballroom. The chandelier was lit and couples were circling all around them, some in costume and some not, to the smooth sounds of some post-war band. But which war? Can you be certain? No, of course not. He was certain of only one thing. He was dancing with a beautiful woman. She was tall and auburn-haired, dressing in clinging white satin, and she was dancing close to him, her breasts pressed softly and sweetly against his chest. Her white hand was entwined in his. She was wearing a small and sparkly cat's eye mask, and her hair had been brushed over to one side in a soft and gleaming fall that seemed to pool in the valley between their touching shoulders. Her dress was full-skirted, but he could feel her thighs against his legs from time to time, and had become more and more sure that she was smooth and powdered naked under her dress. And he was sporting, okay, okay. Let's see. There was some lewd stuff, I'm just gonna skip all that. Nothing funny, honey, he said, and giggled again. I like you, she whispered, and he thought that her scent was like lilies, secret and hidden in cracks furred with green moss-like places, where sunshine is short and shadows long. I like you too. We could go upstairs if you want. I'm supposed to be with Harry, but he'll never notice. He's too busy teasing poor Roger. The number ended. There was a spatter of applause, and then the band swung into Mood Indigo with scarcely a pause. Jack looked over her bare shoulder and saw Derwent standing by the refreshment table. The girl in the sarong was with him. There were bottles of champagne and ice buckets ranged along the white lawn covering the table, and Derwent held a foaming bottle in his hand. A knot of people gathered, laughing. In front of Derwent and the girl in the sarong, Roger capered grotesquely on all fours, his tail dragging limply behind him. He was barking. "Speak, boy, speak," Harry Derwent cried. "Rofe, Rofe," Roger responded. Everyone clapped. A few of the men whistled. "Now sit up, doggy." Roger clambered up on his haunches. The muzzle of his mask was frozen in its eternal snarl. Inside the eye holes, Roger's eyes rolled with frantic, sweaty hilarity. He held his arms out, dangling the paws. "Rofe, Rofe." Derwent upended the bottle of champagne, and it fell on a foamy Niagara onto the upturned mask. Roger made frantic slurping sounds, and everyone applauded again. Some of the women screamed with laughter. "Isn't Harry a card?" his partner asked him, pressing close again. "Everyone says so. He's AC/DC, you know. Poor Roger's only DC. He spent a weekend with Harry in Cuba once. Oh, months ago. Now he follows Harry everywhere, wagging his little tail behind him." She giggled. The shy scent of lilies drifted up. "But of course Harry never goes back for seconds. Not on his DC side, anyway. And Roger is just wild. Harry told him if he came to the masked ball as a doggy, a cute little doggy, he might reconsider. And Roger is such a silly that he..." The number ended. There was more applause. The band members were filing down for a break. "Excuse me, sweetness," she said. "There's someone I just must. Darla, you dear girl, where have you been?" She wove her way into the eating, drinking throng, and he gazed after her stupidly, wondering how they had happened to be dancing together in the first place. He didn't remember. Incidents seemed to have occurred with no connections. First here, then there, then everywhere. His head was spinning. He smelled lilies and juniper berries. Up by the refreshment table, Derwent was now holding a tiny triangular sandwich over Roger's head and urging him, to the general merriment of the onlookers, to do a somersault. The dog mask was turned upward. The silver sides of the dog costume bellowed in and out. Roger suddenly leaped, tucking his head under, and tried to roll in midair. His leap was too low and too exhausted. He landed awkwardly on his back, rapping his head smartly on the tiles. A hollow groan drifted out of the dog mask. Derwent led the applause. "Try again, doggy, try again." The onlookers took up the chant, "Try again, try again," and Jack staggered off the other way, feeling vaguely ill. He almost fell over the drinks cart that was being wheeled around by a low-browed man in a white mess jacket. His foot rapped the lower chromed shelf of the cart. The bottles and siphons on top clattered together musically. "Sorry," Jack said thickly. He suddenly felt closed in and claustrophobic. He wanted to get out. He wanted the overlook back the way it had been, free of these unwanted guests. His place was not honored as the true opener of the way. He was only another of the 10,000 cheering extras, a doggy rolling over and sitting up on command. "Quite all right," the man in the white mess jacket said. The polite clipped English coming from that thug's face was surreal. "A drink?" "Martini." From behind him, another comber of laughter broke. Roger was howling to the tune of "Home on the Range." Someone was picking out accompaniment on the Steinway Baby Grand. Here you are. The frosty cold glass was pressed into his hand. Jack drank gratefully, feeling the gin hit and crumble away the first inroads of sobriety. Is it all right, sir? Fine. Thank you, sir. The cart began to roll again. Jack suddenly reached out and touched the man's shoulder. Yes, sir? Pardon me, but what's your name? The other showed no surprise. Grady, sir. Delbert Grady. But that... The bartender was looking at him politely. Jack tried again. Although his mouth was mushed by gin and unreality, each word felt as large as an ice cube. Weren't you once the caretaker here? But he couldn't finish. He couldn't say it. Why, no, sir, I don't believe so. But your wife, your daughters... My wife is helping in the kitchen, sir. The girls are asleep, of course. It's much too late for them. You were the caretaker. Oh, say it! You killed them. Grady's face remained blankly polite. I don't have any recollection of that at all, sir. His glass was empty. Grady plucked it from Jack's unresisting fingers and set about making another drink for him. There was a small white plastic bucket on his cart that was filled with olives. For some reason, they reminded Jack of tiny severed heads. Grady speared one deftly, dropped it into the glass, and handed it to him. But you're the caretaker, sir, Grady said mildly. You've always been the caretaker. I should know, sir. I've always been here. The same manager hired us both at the same time. Is it all right, sir? Jack gulped at his drink. His head was swirling. Mr. Ullman. I don't know him by that name, sir. But the manager, Grady said. The hotel, sir. Surely you realize who hired you, sir. No, he said thickly. No, I believe you must take it up further with your son, Mr. Torrance, sir. He understands everything, although he hasn't enlightened you. Rather naughty of him, if I may be so bold, sir. In fact, he's crossed you at almost every turn, hasn't he? And him not yet 6. Yes, Jack said, he has. There was another wave of laughter from behind him. He needs to be corrected, if you don't mind me saying so. He needs a good talking to, and perhaps a bit more. My own girls, sir, didn't care for the Overlook at first. One of them actually stole a pack of my matches and tried to burn it down. I corrected them. I corrected them most harshly. And when my wife tried to stop me from doing my duty, I corrected her. He offered Jack a bland, meaningless smile. I find it a sad but true fact that women rarely understand a father's responsibility to his children. Husbands and fathers do have certain responsibilities, don't they, sir? Yes, Jack said. They don't love the Overlook as I did, Grady said, beginning to make him another drink. Silver bubbles rose in the upended gin bottle. Just as your son and wife don't love it. Not at present, anyway. But they will come to love it. You must show them the error of their ways, Mr. Torrance. Do you agree? Yes, I do. He did see. He had been too easy with them. Husbands and fathers did have certain responsibilities. Father knows best. They did not understand. That in itself was no crime, but they were willfully not understanding. He was not ordinarily a harsh man, but he did believe in punishment. And if his son and his wife had willfully set themselves against his wishes, against the things he knew were best for them, then didn't he have a certain duty? A thankless child is sharper than a serpent's tooth, Grady said, handing him his drink. I do believe that the manager could bring your son into line, and your wife would shortly follow. Do you agree, sir? He was suddenly uncertain. But if they could just leave... after all, it's me the manager wants, isn't it? It must be, because why? He should know, but suddenly he didn't. Oh, his poor brain was swimming. Bad dog, Derwent was saying loudly to a counterpoint of laughter. Bad dog to pedal on the floor. Oh no. Of course you know, Grady said, leaning confidently over the cart. Your son is attempting to bring an outside party into it. Your son has a very great talent, one that the manager could use to even further improve the Overlook, to further enrich it, shall we say. But your son is attempting to use that very talent against us. He's willful, Mr. Torrance, sir. Willful. Outside party? Jack asked stupidly. Grady nodded. Who? A black man, Grady said. A black cook. It doesn't actually say black man, but like I'm just trying to I'm trying to like not get I'm trying to not get banned here. Halloran? I believe that is his name, sir, yes. Another burst of laughter from behind them was followed by Roger saying something in a whining, protesting voice. Yes, 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 Derwent began to chant. The others around him took it up, but before Jack could hear what they wanted Roger to do now, the band began to play again. The tune was Tuxedo Junction, with a lot of mellow sax in it, but not much soul. Soul? Soul hadn't even been invented yet. Or has it? A black cook. He opened his mouth to speak, not knowing what might come out. What it did was, I was told you hadn't finished high school, but you don't talk like an uneducated man. It's true that I left organized education very early, sir, but the manager takes care of his help. He finds that it pays. Education always pays, don't you agree, sir? Yes, Jack said dazedly. For instance, you show a great interest in learning more about the Overlook Hotel. Very wise of you, sir, very noble. A certain scrapbook was left in the basement for you to find. By whom? Jack asked eagerly. By the manager, of course. Certain other materials could be put at your disposal if you wish them. I do, very much. He tried to control the eagerness in his voice and failed miserably. You're a true scholar, Grady said. Pursue the topic to the end. Exhaust all sources. He dipped his low-browed head, pulled out the lapel of his white mesh jacket, and buffed his knuckles at a spot of dirt that was invisible to Jack. Oh, okay, hold on. I need to, like, take a sip real quick. And the manager puts no strings on his largesse? Don't know how to pronounce that. Grady went on. Not at all. Look at me, a 10th grade dropout. Think how much further you yourself could go in the Overlook's organizational structure. Perhaps, in time, to the very top. Really? Jack whispered. But that's really up to your son to decide, isn't it? Grady asked, raising his eyebrows. The delicate gesture went oddly with the brows themselves, which were bushy and somehow savage. Up to Danny, Jack frowned at Grady. No, of course not. I wouldn't allow my son to make decisions concerning my career, not at all. What do you take me for? A dedicated man, Grady said warmly. Perhaps I put it badly, sir. Let us say your future here is contingent upon how you decide to deal with your son's waywardness. I make my own decisions, Jack whispered. But you must deal with him. I will. Firmly, I will. A man who cannot control his own family holds very little interest for our manager. A man who cannot guide the courses of his own the courses of his own wife and son can hardly be expected to guide himself. Let alone assume a position of responsibility in an operation of this magnitude. I said I'll handle him, Jack shouted suddenly enraged. Tuxedo Junction had just concluded and a new tune hadn't begun. His shout fell perfectly onto the gap, and conversation suddenly ceased behind him. His skin suddenly felt hot all over. He became fixedly positive that everyone was staring at him. They had finished with Roger and would now commence with him. Roll over, sit up, play dead. If you play the game with us, we'll play the game with you. Position of responsibility. They wanted him to sacrifice his son. Now he follows Harry everywhere, wagging his little tail behind him. Roll over, play dead, chastise your son. Right this way, sir, Grady was saying. Something that might interest you. The conversation had begun again, lifting and dropping in its own rhythm, weaving in and out of the band music, now doing a swing version of Lennon and McCartney's Ticket to Ride. I've heard better over supermarket loudspeakers. He giggled foolishly. He looked down at his left hand and saw there was another drink in it half full. He emptied it at a gulp. Now he was standing in front of the mantelpiece, the heat from the crackling fire that had been laid in the hearth warming his legs. A fire, in August, yes and no, all times are one. There was a clock under a glass dome flanked by 2 carved ivory elephants. Its hands stood at a minute to midnight. He gazed at it blearily. Had this been what Grady wanted him to see? He turned around to ask, but Grady had left him. Halfway through Ticket to Ride, the band wound up in a brassy flourish. The hour is at hand, Horace Derwent proclaimed. Midnight! Unmask! Unmask! He tried to turn again to see what famous faces were hidden beneath the glitter and paint and masks, but he was frozen now, unable to look away from the clock. Its hands had come together and pointed straight up. Unmask! Unmask! The chant went up. The clock began to chime delicately. Along the steel runner below the clock face, from left to right, 2 figures advanced. Jack watched, fascinated, the unmasking forgotten. Clockwork whirred. Cogs turned and meshed, brass warmly glowing. The balance wheel rocked back and forth precisely. One of the characters was a man standing on his tiptoes, with what looked like a tiny club clasped in his hands. The other was a small boy wearing a dunce cap. The clockwork figures glittered, fantastically precise. Along the front of the boy's dunce cap, he could read the engraved word, Fool. The 2 figures slipped onto the opposing ends of a steel axis bar. Somewhere, tinkling on and on, were the strains of a Strauss waltz. An insane commercial began to run through his mind to the tune, Buy dog food, rof, 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 buy dog food. I don't know the tune, so I couldn't, say it accurately. The steel mallet in the clockwork daddy's hands came down on the boy's head. The clockwork sun crumbled forward. The mallet rose and fell, rose and fell. The boy's upstretched, protesting hands began to falter. The boy sagged from his crouch to a prone position, and still the hammer rose and fell to the light, tinkling air of the Strauss melody. And it seemed that he could see the man's face, working and nodding and constricting, could see the clockwork daddy's mouth opening and closing as he berated the unconscious bludgeoned figure of the son. A spot of red flew up against the inside of the glass dome. Another followed. 2 more splattered beside it. Now the red liquid was spraying up like an obscene rain shower, striking the glass sides of the dome and running, obscuring what was going on inside. And flicked through the scarlet were tiny gray ribbons of tissue, fragments of bone and brain. And still he could see the hammer rising and falling as the clockwork continued to turn and the cogs continued to mesh the gears and teeth of this cunningly made machine. Unmask! Unmask! Derwent was shrieking behind him. And somewhere a dog was howling in human tones. But clockwork can't bleed. Clockwork can't bleed. The entire dome was splashed with blood. He could see clotted bits of hair, but nothing else. Thank God he could see nothing else. And still he thought he would be sick because he could hear the hammer blows still falling. Could hear them through the glass just as he could hear the phrases of the Blue Danube. But the sounds were no longer the mechanical tink, tink, tink noises of a mechanical hammer striking a mechanical head, but the soft and squashy thudding sounds of a real hammer slicing down and whacking into a spongy, muddy ruin. A ruin that had once been unmasked. The Red Death held sway over all. Okay, I need to take another sip. It's a lot. Alright. With a miserable rising scream, he turned away from the clock. His hands outstretched, his feet stumbling against one another like wooden blocks as he begged for them to stop. To take him, Danny, Wendy, to take the whole world if they wanted it. But only to stop and leave him a little sanity, a little light. The ballroom was empty. The chairs with their spindly legs were upended on tables, covered with plastic dust drops. The red rug with its golden tracings was back on the dance floor, protecting the polished hardwood surface. The bandstand was deserted except for a disassembled microphone stand and a dusty guitar leaning stringless against the wall. Cold morning light, winter light, fell languidly through the high windows. His head was still reeling, he still felt drunk, but when he turned back to the mantelpiece, his drink was gone. There were only the ivory elephants and the clock. He stumbled back across the cold, shadowy lobby and through the dining room. His foot hooked around a table leg and he fell full length, upsetting the table in a clatter. He struck his nose hard on the floor and it began to bleed. He got back up, snuffling back blood and wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He crossed to the Colorado Lounge and shoved through the batwing doors, making them fly back and bang into the walls. The place was empty, but the bar was fully stocked. God be praised. Glass and silver edging on labels glowed warmly in the dark. Once, he remembered a very long time ago, he had been angry that there was no back bar mirror. Now he was glad. Looking into it would have been... Looking into it, he would have seen just another drunk fresh off the wagon. Bloody nose, untucked shirt, hair rumpled, cheeks stubbly. This is what it's like to stick your whole hand into the nest. Loneliness surged over him suddenly and completely. He cried out with sudden wretchedness, and honestly, he wished he were dead. His wife and son were upstairs with the door locked against him. The others had all left. The party was over. He lurched forward again, reaching the bar. "Lloyd, where the fuck are you?" he screamed. There was no answer. In this well-padded cell room, his words did not even echo back to give the illusion of company. "Grady!" No answer, only the bottles standing stiffly at attention. "Roll over, play fetch." Roll over, play dead. Fetch. Play dead. Sit up. Play dead. Never mind. I'll do it myself, goddammit. Halfway over the bar, he lost his balance and pitched forward, hitting his head a muffled blow on the floor. He got up on his hands and knees, his eyeballs moving disjointed from side to side, fuzzy muttering sounds coming from his mouth. Then he collapsed, his face turned to one side, breathing in harsh tones. Outside, the wind whooped harder, driving the thickening snow before it. It was 8:30 a.m. Okay. Oh, let's pour some more tea, because mine's already gone cold again. Oh boy. Chapter 45. I mean, we're still like a ways away, unfortunately. I mean, right now I would have like started to wind down for like 8, because that's usually when I stop, and I'm like stubbornly determined to get this all done in one stream. Lord knows I need those sips. I mean, I could also take a stretch break, I guess. Ooh. Good stuff. Nice. Alright, time to, Oh, hi, reveal. It's a good time, too. I like how it was like it made an error noise because I'm in like the PDF reader. But Excuse me. Well-timed noise, yeah. Let me just like, let me like butter the pipes a little bit more. Okay. I just gotta like make sure I'm like I'm doing okay. I gotta like I feel like I'm gonna need to like pause more often to take more like tea breaks or tea sips or whatever. Okay. Just a little more butter for the road. Reading Stephen King takes all you can muster. That man sure does like to, read his own writing, I guess. And also, he likes to use racial slurs a lot. Like, a lot. For some reason. A little bit sus. Okay. And make things awkward. Yeah. So far in this book, he seems very, like, obsessed with women's breasts. And like, borderline pornography. Which I have to skip because I can't read that out loud. Let's see. Chapter 45. Stapleton Airport, Denver. At 8:31 MST, a woman on TWA's Flight 196 burst into tears and began to bugle her own opinion, which was perhaps not unshared among some of the other passengers, or even the crew for that matter, that the plane was going to crash. The sharp-faced woman next to Halloran looked up from her book and offered a brief character analysis, ninny, and went back to her book. She had downed 2 screwdrivers during her flight, but they seemed not to have thawed her at all. "It's going to crash," the woman was crying out shrilly. "Oh, I just know it is." A stewardess hurried to her seat and squatted beside her. Halloran thought to himself that only stewardesses and very young housewives seemed able to squat with any degree of grace. It was a rare and wonderful talent. He thought about this while the stewardess talked softly and soothingly to the woman, quieting her bit by bit. Halloran didn't know about anyone else on 196, but he personally was almost scared enough to shit peach pits. Outside the window, there was nothing to be seen but a buffeting curtain of white. The plane rocked sickeningly from side to side, with gusts that seemed to come from everywhere. The engines were cranked up to provide partial compensation, and as a result, the floor was vibrating under their feet. There were several people moaning in tourist behind them. One steward had gone back with a handful of fresh air-sick bags, and a man 3 rows in front of Halloran had whooped into his National Observer and had grinned apologetically at the stewardess who came to help him clean up, and also a fucking guy outside my house, like, going around on his motorcycle. That's what I hate about, like, the first nice day after it's been cold for a while. Everyone's out there on their motorcycles. "That's alright," she comforted him. "That's how I feel about the Reader's Digest." Halloran had flown enough to be able to surmise what had happened. They had been flying against bad headwinds most of the way. The weather over Denver had worsened suddenly and unexpectedly, and now it was just a little late to divert for some place where the weather was better. Feats don't fail me now. Okay, I need some more chapstick. Honestly, I'm surprised this stuff like wore off so suddenly. I thought it would last me a lot longer. Buddy boy, this is some fucked up cavalry charge. The stewardess seemed to have succeeded in curbing the worst of the woman's hysterics. She was snuffling and honking into a lace handkerchief, but had ceased broadcasting her opinions about the flight's possible conclusion to the cabin at large. The stewardess gave her a final pat on the shoulder and stood up just as the 747 gave its worst lurch yet. The stewardess stumbled backward and landed in the lap of a man of the man who had whooped into his paper, exposing a lovely length of nylon thigh. The man blinked and then patted her kindly on the shoulder. She smiled back, but Halloran thought the strain was showing. It had been one hell of a hard flight this morning. There was a little ping as the no smoking light reappeared. "This is the captain speaking," a soft, slightly southern voice informed them. "We're ready to begin our descent into Stapleton International Airport. It's been a rough flight, for which I apologize. The landing may be a bit rough also, but we anticipate no real difficulty. Please observe the fasten seat belts and no smoking signs, and we hope you enjoy your stay in the Denver metro area. And we also hope..." Another hard bump rocked the plane and then dropped her with a quickening elevator plunge. Halloran's stomach did a queasy hornpipe. Several people, not all women by any means, screamed, "That we'll see you again on another TWA flight real soon." "Not bloody likely," someone behind Halloran said. "So silly," the sharp-faced woman next to Halloran remarked, putting a matchbook cover into her book and shutting it as the plane began to descend. "When one has seen the horrors of a dirty little war, as you have, or sensed the degrading immorality of CIA dollar diplomacy intervention, as I have, a rough landing pales into insignificance. Am I right, Mr. Halloran?" "As rain, ma'am," he said. It looked bleakly out into the wildly blowing snow. "How is your steel plate reacting to all of this, if I might inquire?" "Oh, my head's fine," Halloran said. "It's just my stomach that's a mite queasy." "A shame." She reopened her book. As I descended through the impenetrable clouds of snow, Halloran thought of a crash that occurred at Boston's Logan Airport a few years ago. The conditions had been similar, only fog instead of snow had reduced visibility to zero. The plane had caught its undercarriage on a retaining wall near the end of the landing strip. What had been left of the 89 people aboard hadn't looked much different from a hamburger helper casserole. He wouldn't mind so much if it was just himself. He was pretty much alone in the world now, and attendance at his funeral would be mostly held down to the people he had worked with and the old renegade Masterton. I guess I pronounced it Masterson last time. Who would at least drink to him. But the boy was depending on him. He was maybe all the help that child could expect, and he didn't like the way the boy's last call had been snapped off. He kept thinking of the way those hedge animals had seemed to move. A thin white hand appeared over his. The woman with the sharp face had taken off her glasses. Without them, her features seemed much softer. "It'll be all right," she said. Halloran made a smile and nodded. As advertised, the plane came down hard, reunited with the earth forcefully enough to knock most of the magazines out of the rack at the front, and to send plastic trays cascading out of the galley like oversized playing cards. No one screamed, but Halloran had heard several sets of teeth clicking violently together like gypsy castanets. Then the turbine engines rose to a howl, braking the plane, and as they dropped in volume, the pilot's soft southern voice, perhaps not completely steady, came over the intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed at Stapleton Airport. Please remain in your seats until the plane has come to a complete stop at the terminal. Thank you." The woman beside Halloran closed her book and uttered a long sigh. "We live to fight another day, Mr. Halloran." "Lady, we aren't done with this one yet." "True, very true. Would you care to have a drink at the lounge with me?" "I would, but I have an appointment to keep." "Pressing?" "Very pressing," Halloran said gravely. "Something that will improve the general situation in some small way, I hope." "I hope so too," Halloran said and smiled. She smiled back at him, 10 years dropping silently from her face as she did so. Okay, that's a page break, not a chapter end, but I still need a drink. I think I could pour the rest of my tea and then put the teacup on the warmer. It's about that time. I'm sure there's a lot of, like, debris that's going in there with it, but what can you do? Okay. Just set that off to the side. Put that over there. Actually, let me take a sip first. It's nice and hot. Ooh, that'll reinvigorate the pipes. For certain. Okay. Let me get a little bit more butter in here. Okay. Because he had only the flight bag he'd carried for luggage, Halloran beat the crowd to the Hertz desk on the lower level. Outside the smoked glass windows, he could see the snow still falling steadily. The gusting wind drove white clouds of it back and forth, and the people walking across the parking area were struggling against it. One man lost his hat, and Halloran could commiserate with him as it whirled high, wide, and handsome. The man stared after it, and Halloran thought, "Oh, just forget it, man. That Hamburg ain't coming down until it gets to Arizona." On the heels of that, he thought, if it's this bad in Denver, what's it going to be like west of Boulder? Best not to think about that, maybe. "Can I help you, sir?" a girl in Hertz yellow asked him. "If you got a car, you can help me," he said with a big grin. For a heavier-than-average charge, he was able to get a heavier-than-average car, a silver and black Buick Electra. He was thinking of the winding mountain roads rather than style. He would have to stop somewhere along the way and get chains put on. He wouldn't get far without them. "How bad is it?" he asked as she handed him the rental agreement to sign. "They say it's the worst storm since 1969, she answered brightly. "Do you have far to drive, sir?" "Farther than I'd like." "If you like, sir, I can phone ahead to the Texaco station at the Route 270 junction. They'll put chains on for you." "That would be a great blessing, dear." She picked up the phone and made the call. "They'll be expecting you." "Thank you very much." Leaving the desk, he saw the sharp-faced woman standing on one of the queues that had formed in front of the luggage carousel. She was still reading her book. Halloran winked at her as she went by. She looked up, smiled at him, and gave him a peace sign. "Shine." He turned up his overcoat collar, smiling, and shifted his flight bag to the other hand. Only a little one, but it made him feel better. He was sorry he'd told her that fish story about having a steel plate in his head. He mentally wished her as well as he went out. Let me just completely reread that. He mentally wished her well as he went out into the howling wind and snow. He thought she wished him the same in return. Okay, another page break. Win in Rome. Let's take another sip. Okay. The charge for putting on the chains at the service station was a modest one, but Halloran slipped the man at work in the garage bay an extra 10 to get moved up a little way on the waiting list. It was still 10:15 before he was actually on the road, the windshield wipers clicking and the chains clinking with tuneless monotony on the Buick's big wheels. The turnpike was a mess. Even with the chains on, he could go no faster than 30. Cars had gone off the road at crazy angles, and on several of the grades, traffic was barely struggling along, summer tires spinning helplessly in the drifting powder. It was the first big storm of the winter down here in the lowlands, if you could call a mile above sea level low. And it was a mother. Many of them were unprepared, common enough, but Halloran still found himself cursing them as he inched around them, peering into his snow-clogged outside mirror to be sure nothing was... let me just completely reread that, okay? Many of them were unprepared, common enough, but Halloran still found himself cursing them. As Thank you. Oh, wait, Guapenton? Oh, that's a strange name, but I appreciate you. Hi. Hello. I hope you're enjoying. Halloran still found himself cursing them as he inched around them, peering into his snow-clogged outside mirror to be sure nothing was Dashing through the snow. Coming up in the left-hand lane to cream his black ass. There was more bad luck waiting for him at the Route 36 entrance ramp. Route 36, the Denver-Boulder Turnpike, also goes west to Estes Park, where it connects to Route 7. My name is Hello Handsome is translated into Spanish. Oh, nice. Are you handsome? That road, also known as the Upland Highway, goes through Sidewinder, passes the Overlook Hotel, and finally winds down the western slope and into Utah. The entrance ramp had been blocked by an overturned semi. Bright burning flares had been scattered around it like birthday candles on some idiot child's cake. He came to a stop and rolled his window down. A cop with a fur Cossack hat jammed down over his ears, gestured with one gloved hand toward the flow of traffic moving along on I-125. You can't get up here, he bawled to Halloran over the wind. Go down 2 exits, get on 91, and connect with 36 at Broomfield. I think I could get around him on the left, Halloran shouted back. That's 20 miles out of my way, what are you rapping? I'll wrap your friggin' head, the cop shouted back. This ramp's closed. Halloran backed up, waited for a break in traffic, and continued on his way up Route 25. The signs informed him it was only 100 miles to Cheyenne, Wyoming. If he didn't look out for his ramp, he'd wind up there. He inched his speed up to 30 miles, but dared no more, or up to 35. Already, snow was threatening to clog his wiper blades, and the traffic patterns were decidedly crazy. 20-mile detour. He cursed, and the feeling that time was growing shorter for the boy welled up in him again, nearly suffocating with its urgency. And at the same time, he felt a fatalistic certainty that he would not be coming back from this trip. He turned on the radio, dialed past Christmas ads, and found a weather forecast. 6 inches already, and another foot is expected in the Denver metro area by nightfall. Local and state police urge you not to take your car out of the garage unless it's absolutely necessary, and warn that most mountain passes have already been closed. So stay home and wax up your boards and keep tuned to... Thanks, Mother, Halloran said and turned the radio off savagely. Okay, let me get a sip, because this is a doozy. Man, I can't believe we're only up to chapter 46. Let me go back to the guide again, the glossary. How many chapters are there again? So let's see, 58. Oh no. Oh no. Ugh. Okay, well, whatever, I guess. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do this. I'm not giving up. I googled it earlier. How many of those are only 3 pages though? I guess we're gonna have to find out. Hopefully most of them. I mean, I have to assume, like, we're getting to the climax, so he's probably gonna have like some intentionally short chapters for emphasis or whatever. I hope so. Let me get some butter. A little bit of butter. Just a little bit. I mean, I only melted like half a tablespoon of butter. I'm going through it very slowly. Okay. Let's see. Chapter 46. Wendy. Around noon, after Danny had gone into the bathroom to use the toilet, Wendy took the towel-wrapped knife from under her pillow, put it in the pocket of her bathrobe, and went over to the bathroom door. Danny? What? I'm going down to make us some lunch, okay? Okay. Do you want me to come down? No, I'll bring it up. How about a cheese omelet and some soup? Sure. She hesitated outside the closed door a moment longer. Danny, are you sure it's okay? Yeah, he said. Just be careful. Where's your father? Do you know? His voice came back curiously flat. No, but it's okay. She stifled an urge to keep asking, to keep picking around the edges of to keep picking around the edges of the thing. The thing was there, they knew what it was. Picking at it was only going to frighten Danny more, and herself. Jack had lost his mind. They had sat together on Danny's cot as the storm began to pick up clout and meanness around 8 o'clock this morning, and had listened to him downstairs, bellowing and stumbling from one place to another. Most of it had seemed to come from the ballroom. Jack singing tuneless bits of song, Jack holding up one side of an argument, Jack screaming loudly at one point, freezing both of their faces as they stared into one another's eyes. Finally, they had heard him stumbling back across the lobby, and Wendy thought she had heard a banging noise, a loud banging noise, as if he had fallen down or pushed a door violently open. Since 8:30 or so, 3.5 hours now, there had only been silence. She went down the short hall, turned into the main first-floor corridor, and went to the stairs. She stood on the first-floor landing looking down into the lobby. It appeared deserted, but the gray and snowy day had left much of the long room in shadow. Danny could be wrong. Jack could be behind a chair or couch, maybe behind the registration desk, waiting for her to come down. She wetted her lips. Jack? No answer. Her hand found the handle of the knife and she began to go down. She had seen the end of her marriage many times and divorce, and Jack's death at the scene of a drunken car accident, a regular vision in the dark 2 o'clock of Stovington mornings, and occasionally in daydreams of being discovered by another man, a soap opera Galahad who would sweep Danny and her onto the saddle of his snow-white charger and take them away. But she had never envisioned herself prowling halls and staircases like a nervous villain, with a knife clasped in one hand to use against Jack. A wave of despair struck through her at the thought, and she had to stop halfway down the stairs and holding the railing, afraid her knees would buckle. Admit it. It isn't just Jack. He's just the one solid thing in all of this you can hang the other things on. The things you can't believe and yet are being forced to believe. That thing about the hedges, the party favor in the elevator, the mask. She tried to stop the thought, but it was too late. And the voices. Because from time to time it had not seemed that there was a solitary crazy man below them, shouting at and holding conversations with the phantoms in his own crumbling mind. From time to time, like a radio signal fading in and out, she had heard, or thought she had, other voices and music and laughter. At one moment she would hear Jack holding a conversation with someone named Grady. The name was vaguely familiar to her, but she made no actual connection. Making statements and asking questions into silence, yet speaking loudly, as if to make himself heard over a steady background racket. And then eerily, other sounds would be there, seeming to slip into place. A dance band, people clapping, a man with an amused yet authoritative voice, who seemed to be trying to persuade somebody to make a speech. For a period of 30 seconds to a minute she would hear this, long enough to grow faint with terror, and then it would be gone again and she would only hear Jack, talking in that commanding yet slightly slurred way she remembered as his drunk speak voice. But there was nothing in the hotel to drink except cooking sherry, wasn't that right? Yes, but if she could imagine that the hotel was full of voices and music, couldn't Jack imagine that he was drunk? She didn't like that thought, not at all. Wendy reached the lobby and looked around. The velvet rope that had cordoned off the ballroom had been taken down. The steel post it had been clipped to had been knocked over, as if someone had carelessly bumped into it going by. Mellow white light fell through the open door onto the lobby rug from the ballroom's high, narrow windows. Heart thumping, she went to the open ballroom doors and looked in. It was empty and silent, the only sound that curious suboral echo that seems to linger in all large rooms, from the largest cathedral to the smallest hometown bingo parlor. She went back to the registration desk and stood undecided for a moment, listening to the wind howl outside. It was the worst storm so far, and it was still building up force. Somewhere on the west side, a shutter latch had broken, and the shutter banged back and forth with a steady, flat cracking sound, like a shooting gallery with only one customer. Jack, you should really take care of that before something gets in. What would she do if he came at her right now, she wondered. If he should pop up from behind the dark, varnished registration desk, with its pile of triplicate forms and its little silver-plated bell, like some murderous Jack-in-the-Box, pun intended. A grinning Jack-in-the-Box with a cleaver in one hand and no sense at all left behind his eyes. Would she stand frozen with terror, or was there enough of the primal mother in her to fight him for her son until one of them was dead? She didn't know. The very thought made her sick, made her feel that her whole life had been a long and easy dream to lull her sleeplessly or helplessly into this waking nightmare. She was soft. When trouble came, she slept. Her past was unremarkable. She had never been tried in fire. Now the trial was upon her. Not fire, but ice, and she would not be allowed to sleep through this. Her son was waiting for her upstairs. Clutching the haft of the knife tighter, she peered over the desk. Nothing there. Her relieved breath escaped her in a long, hitching sigh. She put the gate up and went through, pausing to glance into the inner office before going in herself. She fumbled through the next door for the bank of kitchen light switches, coldly expecting a hand to close over hers at any second. Then the fluorescents were coming on with a minuscule tinking and humming sounds, and she could see Mr. Halloran's kitchen. Her kitchen now, for better or worse. Pale green tiles, gleaming formica, spotless porcelain, glowing chrome edgings. She had promised him she would keep his kitchen clean, and she had. She felt as if it was one of Danny's safe places. Dick Halloran's presence seemed to enfold and comfort her. Danny had called for Mr. Halloran, and upstairs, sitting next to Danny in fear, as her husband ranted and raved below. That seemed like the faintest of all hopes. But standing here in Mr. Halloran's place, it seemed almost impossible. Perhaps he was on his way now, intent on getting to them regardless of the storm. Perhaps it was so. She went across to the pantry, shot the bolt back, and stepped inside. She got a can of tomato soup and closed the pantry door again, and bolted it. The door was tight against the floor. If you kept it bolted, you didn't have to worry about rat or mouse droppings in the rice or flour or sugar. She opened the can and dropped the slightly jellied contents into a saucepan. Plop. She went to the refrigerator and got milk and eggs for the omelet, then to the walk-in freezer for cheese. All these actions, so common and so much a part of her life before the Overlook, had been a part of her life. And so much a part of her life before the Overlook had been a part of her life, helped to calm her. She melted butter in the frying pan, diluted the soup with milk, and then poured the beaten eggs into the pan. A sudden feeling that someone was standing behind her, reaching for her throat. She wheeled around, clutching the knife. No one there. Get a hold of yourself, girl. She grated a bowl of cheese from the block, added it to the omelet, flipped it, and turned the gas ring down to a bare blue flame. The soup was hot. She put the pot on a large tray with silverware, 2 bowls, 2 plates, the salt and pepper shakers. When the omelet had puffed slightly, Wendy slid it off onto one of the plates and covered it. Now back the way you came. Turn off the kitchen lights, go through the inner office, through the desk gate, collect $200. She stopped on the lobby side of the registration desk and set the tray down beside the silver bell. Unreality would stretch only so far. This was like some surreal game of hide and seek. She stood in the shadowy lobby, frowning in thought. Don't put the facts away this time, girl. There are certain realities as as lunatic as the situation may seem. One of them is that you may be the only responsible person left in this grotesque pile. You have a 5 going on 6 son to look out for, and your husband, whatever has happened to him, and no matter how dangerous he may be, maybe he's part of your responsibility too. And even if he isn't, consider this. Today is December 2nd. You could be stuck up here another 4 months if a ranger doesn't happen by. Even if they do start to wonder why they haven't heard from us on the CB, no one is going to come today or tomorrow, maybe not for weeks. Are you going to spend a month sneaking down to get meals with a knife in your pocket and jumping at every shadow? Do you really think you can avoid Jack for a month? Do you think you can keep Jack out of the upstairs quarters if he wants to get in? He has the pass key and one hard kick would snap the bolt. Leaving the tray on the desk, she walked slowly down to the dining room and looked in. It was deserted. There was one table with the chairs set up around it, the table they had tried eating at until the dining room's emptiness began to freak them out. "Jack," she called hesitantly. At that moment, the wind rose in a gust, driving snow against the shutters. But it seemed to her that there had been something, a muffled sort of groan. "Jack?" No returning sound this time, but her eyes fell on something beneath the bat-wing doors of the Colorado Lounge, something that gleamed faintly in the subdued light. Jack's cigarette lighter. Plucking up her courage, she crossed to the bat wings and pushed them open. The smell of gin was so strong that her breath snagged in her throat. It wasn't even right to call it a smell. It was a positive reek. But the shelves were empty. Where in God's name had he found it? A bottle hidden at the back of one of the cupboards? Where? There was another groan, low and fuzzy, but perfectly audible this time. Wendy walked slowly to the bar. "Jack?" No answer. She looked over the bar and there he was, sprawled out on the floor in a stupor, drunk as a lord by the smell. He must have tried to go right over the top and lost his balance. I wonder he hadn't broken his neck. An old proverb recurred to her. God looks after drunks and little children. Amen. Yet she was not angry with him. Looking down at him, she thought he looked like a horribly overtired little boy who had tried to do too much and had fallen asleep in the middle of the living room floor. He had stopped drinking, and it was not Jack who had made the decision to start again. There had been no liquor for him to start with, so where had it come from? Resting at every 5 or 6 feet along the horseshoe-shaped bar, there were wine bottles wrapped in straw, their mouths plugged with candles. Supposed to look bohemian, she supposed. She picked one of them and shook it, half expecting to hear the slosh of gin inside it. New wine and old bottles. But there was nothing. She set it back down. Jack was stirring. She went around the bar, found the gate, and walked back on the inside to where Jack lay, pausing only to look at the gleaming chromium taps. They were dry, but when she passed close to them, she could smell beer, wet and new like a fine mist. As she reached Jack, he rolled over, opened his eyes, and looked up at her. For a moment, his gaze was utterly blank, and then it cleared. "Wendy?" he asked. "That you?" "Yes," she said. "Do you think you can make it upstairs? If you put your arms around me?" "Jack, where did you—" His hand closed brutally around her ankle. "Jack, what are you—" "Gotcha," he said, and began to grin. There was a stale odor of gin and olives about him that seemed to set off an old terror in her, a worse terror than any hotel could provide by itself. A distant part of her thought that the worst thing was that it had all come back to this, she and her drunken husband. "Jack, I want to help." "Oh yeah, you and Danny only want to help." The grip on her ankle was crushing now. Still holding on to her, Jack was getting shakily to his knees. "You wanted to help us all right out of here." You wanted to help us all right out of here, but now I gotcha." "Jack, you're hurting my ankle." "I'll hurt more than your ankle, you bitch." The words stunned her so completely that she made no effort to move when he let go of her ankle and stumbled from his knees to his feet, where he stood swaying in front of her. "You never loved me," he said. "You wanted us to leave because you know that'll be the end of me. Did you ever think about my responsibilities? No, I guess the fuck you didn't. All you ever think about is ways to drag me down. You're just like my mother, you milksop bitch." "Stop it," she said, crying. "You don't know what you're saying. You're drunk. I don't know how, but you're drunk." "Oh, I know. I know now. You and him. That little pup upstairs. The two of you planning together, isn't that right?" No, we never planned anything. What are you... You liar," he screamed. "Oh, I know how you do it. I guess I know that. When I say we're going to stay here and I'm going to do my job, you say, 'Yes, dear,' and he says, 'Yes, Daddy,' and then you lay out your plans. You plan to use the snowmobile. You planned that. But I knew. I figured it out. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Did you think I was stupid?" She stared at him, unable to speak now. He was going to kill her, and then he was going to kill Danny. Then maybe the hotel would be satisfied and allow him to kill himself. Just like that other caretaker, just like Grady. With almost swooning horror, she realized at last who it was that Jack had been conversing with in the ballroom. "You turned my son against me. That was the worst." His face sagged into lines of self-pity. "My little boy. Now he hates me too." "You saw to that. That was your plan all along, wasn't it? You've always been jealous, haven't you? Just like your mother. You couldn't be satisfied unless you had all the cake, could you? Could you?" She couldn't talk. "Well, I'll fix you," he said, and tried to put his hands around her throat. She took a step backward, then another, and he stumbled against her. She remembered the knife in the pocket of her robe and groped for it, but now his left arm had swept around her, pinning her arm against her side. She could smell sharp gin and the sour odor of his sweat. "Have to be punished," he was grunting. "Chastised. Chastise. Harshly." His right hand found her throat. As her breath stopped, pure panic took over. His left hand joined his right, and now the knife was free to her own hand, but she forgot about it. Both of her hands came up and began to yank helplessly at his larger, stronger ones. "Mommy!" Danny shrieked from somewhere. "Daddy, stop! You're hurting Mommy!" He screamed piercingly, a high-end crystal sound that she heard from far off. Red flashes of light leaped in front of her eyes like ballet dancers. The room grew darker. She saw her son clamber up on the bar and throw himself at Jack's shoulders. Suddenly, one of his hands that had been crushing her throat was gone as Jack cuffed Danny away with a snarl. The boy was back against the empty shelves and dropped to the floor, dazed. The hand was back on her throat again. The red flashes began to turn black. Danny was crying weakly. Her chest was burning. Jack was shouting into her face, "I'll fix you! God damn you, I'll show you who's boss around here! I'll show you!" But all sounds were fading down a long dark corridor. Her struggles began to weaken. One of her hands fell away from his and dropped slowly, until the arm was stretched out at right angles to her body, the hand dangling limply from the wrist like the hand of a drowning woman. It touched a bottle, one of the straw-wrapped wine bottles that served as decorative candle holders. Sightlessly, with the last of her strength, she groped for the bottle's neck and found it, feeling the greasy beads of wax against her hand. And oh God, if it slips. She brought it up and then down, praying for aim, knowing that it only struck his shoulder or upper arm. If it only struck his shoulder or upper arm, she was dead. But the bottle came down squarely on Jack Torrance's head, the glass shattering violently inside the straw. The base of it was thick and heavy, and it made a sound against his skull like a medicine ball dropped on a hardwood floor. He rocked back on his heels, his eyes rolling up in their sockets. The pressure on her throat loosened and then gave way entirely. He put his hands out as if to steady himself, and then crashed over on his back. Wendy drew a long, sobbing breath. She almost fell herself, clutching the edge of the bar, and managed to hold herself up. Consciousness wavered in and out. She could hear Danny crying, but she had no idea where she was. It sounded like crying in an echo chamber. Dimly, she saw dime-sized drops of blood falling to the dark surface of the bar. From her nose, she thought. She cleared her throat and spat on the floor. It sent a wave of agony up the column of her throat, but the agony subsided to a steady, dull press of pain. Just bearable. Okay, I need to take a sip, because, I feel like... How much longer is this chapter? Oh, it's a doozy. It's a doozer. I might need more than one tea break mid-chapter. Little by little, she managed to get control of herself. She let go of the bar, turned around, and saw Jack lying full length, the shattered bottle beside him. He looked like a felled giant. Danny was crouched below the lounge's cash register, both hands in his mouth, staring at his unconscious father. Wendy went to him unsteadily and touched his shoulder. Danny cringed away from her. "Danny, listen to me." "No, no," he muttered in a husky old man's voice. "Daddy hurt you. You hurt Daddy. Daddy hurt you. I want to go to sleep. Danny wants to go to sleep. Danny, sleep, sleep. Nighty-night." "No!" Pain ripped up her throat again. She winced against it. But he opened his eyes. They looked at her warily from bluish-shadowed sockets. She made herself speak calmly, her eyes never leaving his. Her voice was low and husky, almost a whisper. It hurt to talk. "Listen to me, Danny. It wasn't your daddy trying to hurt me, and I didn't want to hurt him. The hotel's gotten into him, Danny. The Overlook has gotten into your daddy. Do you understand me?" Some kind of knowledge came slowly back into Danny's eyes. "The bad stuff," he whispered. "There was none of it here before, was there?" "No. The hotel put it there. She broke off in a fit of coughing and spat out more blood. Her throat already felt puffed to twice its size. The hotel made him drink it. "Did you hear the people he was talking to this morning?" "Yes, the hotel people. I heard them too. And that means the hotel's getting stronger. It wants to hurt all of us. But I hope, that it can only do that through your daddy. He was the only one it could catch. Are you understanding me, Danny? It's desperately important that you understand." The hotel caught Daddy. He looked at Jack and groaned helplessly. "I know you love your daddy. I do too. We have to remember that the hotel is trying to hurt him as much as it is us." And she was convinced that was true. More, she thought that Danny might be the one the hotel really wanted. The reason it was going so far. Maybe the reason it was able to go so far. It might even be that in some unknown fashion it was Danny's shine that was powering it. The way a battery powers the electrical equipment in a car. The way a battery gets a car to start. If they got out of here, the Overlook might subside to its old semi-sentient state, able to do no more than present penny dreadful horror slides to the more psychically able guests who entered it. Without Danny, it was not much more than an amusement park haunted house where a guest or two might hear rappings or the phantom sounds of a masquerade party, or see an occasional disturbing thing. But if it absorbed Danny's shine or life force or spirit, whatever you wanted to call it, into itself, what would it be then? The thought made her cold all over. I need another sip. Oh gosh. Okay. How much longer? Oh my god. Ugh. You can hear my suffering in real time. I don't know how much longer this is going on for, but I hope it ends soon. Let me get some butter in my mouth. Alright. "I wish Daddy was all better," Danny said. Then the tears began to flow again. "Me too," she said and hugged Danny tightly. "And honey, that's why you've got to help me put your daddy somewhere. Somewhere that the hotel can't make him hurt us, and where he can't hurt himself. Then, If your friend Dick comes or a park ranger, we can take him away. And I think he might be alright again. All of us might be alright. I think there's still a chance for that, if we're strong and brave, like you were when you jumped on his back. Do you understand? She looked at him pleadingly and thought how strange it was. She had never seen him when he looked so much like Jack. Yes, he said and nodded. I think if we can get away from here, everything will be like it was. Where could we put him? The pantry. There's food in there, and a good strong bolt on the outside. It's warm, and we can eat up the things from the refrigerator and the freezer. There will be plenty for all three of us until help comes. Do we do it now? Yes, right now, before he wakes up. Danny put the bar gate up while she folded Jack's hands onto his chest and listened to his breathing for a moment. It was slow but regular. From the smell of him, she thought he must have been drunk a great deal, and he was out of the habit. She thought it might be liquor as much as the crack on the head with the bottle that had put him out. She picked up his legs and began to drag him along the floor. She had been married to him for nearly 7 years. He had lain on top of her countless times, in the thousands, but she had never realized how heavy he was. Her breath whistled painfully in and out of her hurt throat. Nevertheless, she felt better than she had in days. She was alive, having just brushed so close to death. That was precious. And Jack was alive too. By blind luck rather than plan, they had perhaps found the only way that could bring all of them safely out. Panting harshly, she paused for a moment, holding Jack's feet against her hip. The surroundings reminded her of the old seafaring captain's cry in Treasure Island after old blind Pew had passed him in the black spot. We'll do him yet. And then she remembered uncomfortably that the old sea dog had dropped dead mere seconds later. Are you all right, Mommy? Is he too heavy? I'll manage. She began to drag him again. Danny was beside Jack. One of his hands had fallen off his chest, and Danny replaced it gently, with love. Are you sure, Mommy? Yes, it's the best thing, Danny. It's like putting him in jail. Only for a while. Okay, then. Are you sure you can do it? Yes. But it was a near thing at that. Danny had been cradling his father's head when they went over the door sills, but his hands slipped in Jack's greasy hair as they went into the kitchen. The back of his head struck the tiles, and Jack began to moan and stir. You gotta use smoke, Jack muttered quickly. Now run and get me that gas can. Wendy and Danny exchanged tight, fearful glances. Help me, she said in a low voice. For a moment, Danny stood as if paralyzed by his father's face, and then he moved jerkily to her side and helped her hold the left leg. They dragged him across the kitchen floor in a nightmare kind of slow motion. The only sounds the faint insectile buzz of the fluorescent lights and their own labored breathing. When they reached the pantry, Wendy put Jack's feet down and turned to fumble with the bolt. Danny looked down at Jack, who was lying limp and relaxed again. The shirt tail had pulled out of the back of his pants as they dragged him, and Danny wondered if Daddy was too drunk to be cold. It seemed wrong to lock him in the pantry like a wild animal, but he had seen what he tried to do to Mommy. Even upstairs, he had known Daddy was going to do that. He had heard them arguing in his head. If only we could all be out of here. Or if it was a dream I was having. Back in Stovington, if only. The bolt was stuck. Wendy pulled at it as hard as she could, but it wouldn't move. She couldn't retract the goddamn bolt. It was stupid and unfair. She had opened it with no trouble at all when she had gone in to get the can of soup. Now it wouldn't move. And what was she going to do? They couldn't put him in the walk-in refrigerator. He would freeze or smolder to death. But if they left him out and he woke up... Jack stirred again on the floor. I'll take care of it, he muttered. I understand. He's waking up, Danny. He's waking up, Mommy, Danny warned. Sobbing now, she yanked at the bolt with both hands. Danny, there was something softly menacing, if still blurry, in Jack's voice. That you, old Doc? Just go to sleep, Daddy, Danny said nervously. It's bedtime, you know. He looked up at his mother, still struggling with the bolt, and saw what was wrong immediately. She had forgotten to rotate the bolt before trying to withdraw him. The little catch was stuck in the notch. Here, he said low, and brushed her trembling hands aside. His own were shaking almost as badly. He knocked the catch loose with the heel of his hand, and the bolt drew back quickly. Quick, he said. He looked down. Jack's eyes had fluttered open again, and this time Daddy was looking directly at him. His gaze strangely flat and speculative. You copied it, Daddy told him. I know you did, but it's here somewhere, and I'll find it. That I promise you. I'll find it. His words slurred off again. Wendy pushed the pantry door open with her knee, hardly noticing the pungent odor of dried fruit that wafted out. She picked up Jack's feet again and dragged him in. She was gasping harshly now, at the limit of her strength. As she yanked the chain pull that turned on the light, Jack's eyes fluttered open again. What are you doing? Wendy, what are you doing? She stepped over him. He was quick, amazingly quick. One hand lashed out and she had to sidestep and nearly fall out the door to avoid his grasp. Still, he had caught a handful of her bathrobe and there was a heavy purring noise as it ripped. He was up on his hands and knees now, his hair hanging in his eyes, like some heavy animal, a large dog or a lion. Damn you both, I know what you want, but you're not gonna get it. This hotel, it's mine. It's me they want. Me. The door, Danny, she screamed. Shut the door. He pushed the heavy wooden door shut with a slam just as Jack leaped. The door latched and Jack thudded uselessly against it. Danny's small hands groped at the bolt. Wendy was too far away to help. The issue of whether he would be locked in or free was going to be decided in 2 seconds. Danny missed his grip, found it again, and shot the bolt across just as the latch began to jiggle madly up and down below it. And it stayed there, and there was a series of thuds as Jack slammed his shoulder against the door. The bolt, a 1/4 inch of steel in diameter, showed no signs of loosening. Wendy let her breath out slowly. Let me out of here, Jack raged. Let me out. Danny, doggone it, this is your father and I want to get out. Now do what I tell you. Danny's hand moved automatically toward the bolt. Wendy caught it and pressed it between her breasts. You mind your daddy, Danny. You do what I say. You do it or I'll give you a hiding you'll never forget. Open this door or I'll bash your fucking brains in. Danny looked at her, pale as window glass. They could hear his breath tearing in and out behind the 1/2 inch of solid oak. Wendy, you let me out. Let me out right now. You cheap nickel-plated cold bitch. You let me out. I mean it. Let me out of here and I'll let you go. If you don't, I'll mess you up. I mean it. I'll mess you up so bad your own mother would pass you on the street. Now open this door. Danny moaned. Wendy looked at him and saw he was going to faint in a moment. Come on, Doc, she said, surprised at the calmness of her own voice. It's not your daddy talking, remember. It's the hotel. Come back here and let me out right now, Jack screamed. There was a scraping, breaking sound as he attacked the inside of the door with his fingernails. It's the hotel, Danny said. It's the hotel. I remember. But he looked back over his shoulder and his face was crumpled and terrified. Oh, good Lord. Boy, oh boy. Okay, how long is this next chapter? Okay, thank God. Oh, thank God. It's only like 3 pages long. Thank God. Thank God. Okay. Yeah, for whatever reason, I guess it's like my keys, my key strokes for the hotkeys. They're reacting with Acrobat, Adobe Acrobat Reader. Okay. Okay. Let me get some more butter. Just a little bit. A little bit more. Okay. Chapter 47, Danny. It was 3 in the afternoon of a long, long day. They were sitting on the big bed in their quarters. Danny was turning the purple VW model with the monster sticking out of the sunroof over and over in his hands compulsively. They had heard Daddy's batterings at the door all the way across the lobby. The batterings in his voice, hoarse and petulantly angry in a weak king sort of way. Vomiting promises of punishment, vomiting profanity, promising both of them that they would live to regret betraying him after he had slaved his guts out for them over the years. Danny thought they would no longer be able to hear it upstairs, but the sounds of his rage carried perfectly up the dumb waiter shaft. Mommy's face was pale, and there were horrible brownish bruises on her neck where Daddy had tried to. He turned the model over and over in his hands. Daddy's prize for having learned his reading lessons, where Daddy had tried to hug her too tight. Mommy put some of her music on the little record player, scratchy and full of horns and flutes. She smiled at him tiredly. He tried to smile back and failed. Even with the volume turned up loud, he thought he could still hear Daddy screaming at them and battering the pantry door like an animal in a zoo cage. What if Daddy had to go to the bathroom? What would he do then? Danny began to cry. Wendy turned the volume down on the record player at once, held him, rocked... Okay, let me just reread that. Wendy turned the volume down on the record player at once, held him, rocked him on her lap. Danny, love, it'll be all right. It will. If Mr. Halloran didn't get your message, someone else will. As soon as the storm is over. No one can get up here until then anyway. Mr. Halloran or anyone else. But when the storm is over, everything will be fine again. We'll leave here. And you know what we'll do next spring? The 3 of us? Danny shook his head against her breasts. He didn't know. It seemed there could never be a spring again. We'll go fishing. We'll rent a boat and go fishing, just like we did last year on Chatterton Lake. You, me, and your daddy. And maybe you'll catch a bass for our supper. And maybe we won't catch anything, but we're sure to have a good time. I love you, Mommy, he said and hugged her. Oh, Danny, I love you too. Outside, the wind whooped and screamed. Around 4:30, just as the daylight began to fail, the screams ceased. They had both been dozing uneasily, Wendy still holding Danny in her arms. And she didn't wake, but Danny did. Somehow the silence was worse, more ominous than the screams and the blows against the strong pantry door. Was Daddy asleep again? Or dead? Or what? Did he get out? 15 minutes later, the silence was broken by a hard, grating metallic rattle. There was a heavy grinding, then a mechanical humming. Wendy came awake with a cry. The elevator was running again. They listened to it wide-eyed, hugging each other. It went from floor to floor, the grate rattling back, the brass door slamming open. There was laughter, drunken shouts, occasional screams, and the sounds of breakage. The overlook was coming to life around them. Okay. Let's see. Ooh, okay. Well, that's not too bad. It's only like 8-ish pages, I think. Let me get another sip of my tea. Oh, Lord, I'm running out of tea. Oh, this is bad. Oh no. Oh, God. I'm determined to get through this. No amount of bad things happening can stop me now. Chapter 48, Jack. He sat on the floor of the pantry with his legs out in front of him, a box of Triscuit crackers between them, looking at the door. He was eating the crackers one by one, not tasting them, only eating them because he had to eat something. When he got out of here, he was going to need his strength. All of it. At this precise instant, he thought he had never felt He thought he had never quite felt his body so miserable in his entire life. His mind and body together made up a large, rich scripture of pain. His head ached terribly, the sick throb of a hangover. The attendant symptoms were there, too. His mouth tasted like a manure rake had taken a swing through it. His ears rung. His heart had an extra heavy thudding beat like a tom-tom. In addition, both shoulders ached fiercely from throwing himself against the door, and his throat felt raw and peeled from useless shouting. He had cut his right hand on the door latch. And when he got out of here, he was going to kick some ass. He munched the Triscuits one by one, refusing to give in to his wretched stomach, which wanted to vomit up everything. He thought of the Excedrins in his pocket and decided to wait until his stomach had quieted a bit. No sense swallowing a painkiller if you're going to throw it right back up. Have to use your brain. The celebrated Jack Torrance brain. Aren't you the fellow who was once going to live by his wits? Jack Torrance, best-selling author. Jack Torrance, acclaimed playwright and winner of the New York Critics Circle Award. Jack Torrance, man of letters, esteemed thinker, winner of the Pulitzer Prize at 70 for his trenchant book of memoirs, My Life in the 20th Century. All any of that shit boiled down to was living by your wits. Living by your wits is always knowing where the wasps are. He put another Triscuit into his mouth and crunched it up. What it really came down to, he supposed, was their lack of trust in him. Their failure to believe that he knew what was best for them and how to get out of it. And how to get it, rather. His wife had tried to usurp him, first by fair, sort of, means, then by foul. When her little hints and whining objections had been overturned by his own well-reasoned arguments, she had turned his boy against him, tried to kill him with a bottle, and locked him in all places, of all places, in the goddamn fucking pantry. Still a small interior voice nagged him. Yes, but where did the liquor bottles come from? Isn't that really the central point? You know what happens when you drink. You know it from bitter experience. When you drink, you lose your wits. He hurled the box of Triscuits across the small room. They struck a shelf of canned goods and fell to the floor. He looked at the box, wiped his lips with his hand, and then looked at his watch. It was almost 6:30. He had been in here for hours. His wife had locked him in here, and he'd been here for fucking hours. He could begin to sympathize with his father. The thing he'd never asked himself, Jack realized now, was exactly what had driven Daddy to drink in the first place. And really, when you came right down to what his old students had been pleased to call the nitty-gritty, hadn't it been the woman he was married to? A milksop sponge of a woman, always dragging silently around the house with an expression of doomed martyrdom on her face? A ball and chain around Daddy's ankle? No, not ball and chain. She had never actively tried to make Daddy a prisoner, the way Wendy had done to him. For Jack's father, it must have been more like the fate of McTeague the dentist at the end of Frank Norris's great novel, handcuffed to a dead man in the wasteland. Yes, that was better. Mentally and spiritually dead, his mother had been handcuffed to his father by matrimony. Still, Daddy had tried to do right as he dragged her rotting corpse through life. He tried to bring the 4 children up to know right from wrong, to understand discipline, and above all to respect their father. Well, they had been ingrates, all of them, himself included. And now he was paying the price. His own son had turned out to be an ingrate too. But there was hope. He would get out of here somehow. He would chastise them both, and harshly. He would set Danny as an example, so that the day might come when Danny was grown, a day when Danny would know what to do better than he himself had known. He remembered the Sunday dinner when his father had caned his mother at the table, how horrified he and the others had been. Now he could see how necessary that had been, how his father had only been feigning drunkenness, how his wits had been sharp and alive underneath all along, watching for the slightest sign of disrespect. Jack crawled after the Triscuits and began to eat them again, sitting by the doors she had so treacherously bolted. He wondered exactly what his father had seen, and how he had caught her out by his play acting. Had she been sneering at him behind her hand, sticking her tongue out, making obscene finger gestures, or only looking at him insolently and arrogantly, convinced he was too stupidly drunk to see? Whatever it had been, he had caught her at it, and he had chastised her sharply. And now, 20 years later, he could finally appreciate Daddy's wisdom. Of course, he could say Daddy had been foolish to marry such a woman, to have handcuffed himself to that corpse in the first place, and a disrespectful corpse at that. But when the young marry in haste, they must repent in leisure, and perhaps Daddy's daddy had married the same type of woman, so that unconsciously Jack's daddy had also married one, as Jack himself had. Except that his wife, instead of being satisfied with the passive role of having wrecked one career and crippled another, had opted for the poisonously active task of trying to destroy his last and best chance to become a member of the Overlook staff, and possibly to rise all the way to the position of manager in time. She was trying to deny him Danny, and Danny was his ticket of admission. That was foolish, of course. Why would they want the son when they could have the father? But employers often had foolish ideas, and that was the condition that had been made. He wasn't going to be able to reason with her, he could see that now. He had tried to reason with her in the Colorado Lounge, and she had refused to listen, had hit him over the head with a bottle for his pains. But there would be another time, and soon. He would get out of here. He suddenly held his breath and cocked his head. Somewhere a piano was playing Boogie Woogie and people were laughing and clapping along. The sound was muffled through the heavy wooden door, but audible. The song was, "There'll be a hot time in the old town tonight." His hands curled helplessly into fists. He had to restrain himself from battering at the door with them. The party had begun again. The liquor would be flowing freely. Somewhere dancing with someone else would be the girl who he had felt so maddeningly nude under her white silk gown. "You'll pay for this," he howled. "God damn you two, you'll pay. You'll take your goddamn medicine for this, I promise you. You..." Here now," a mild voice said just outside the door. "No need to shout, old fellow. I can hear you perfectly well." Jack lurched to his feet. "Grady, is that you?" "Yes, sir, indeed it is. You appear to have been locked in." "Let me out, Grady, quickly." "I see you can hardly have taken care of the business we discussed, sir. The correction of your wife and son. They're the ones who locked me in. Pull the bolt, for God's sake." "You let them lock you in?" Grady's voice registered well-bred surprise. "Oh dear. A woman half your size and a little boy? Hardly sets you off as being top managerial timber, does it?" A pulse began to beat in the clock spring of veins at Jack's right temple. "Let me out, Grady. I'll take care of them." "Will you indeed, sir? I wonder." Well-bred surprise was replaced by well-bred regret. "I'm pained to say that I doubt it. I, and others, have really come to believe that your heart is not in this, sir. That you don't have the belly for it." "I do," Jack shouted. "I do, I swear it." "You would bring us your son?" Yes. Your wife would object to that very strongly, Mr. Torrance. And she appears to be somewhat stronger than we have imagined. Somewhat more resourceful. She certainly seems to have gotten the better of you," Grady tittered. "Perhaps, Mr. Torrance, we should have been dealing with her all along." "I'll bring him, I swear it," Jack said. His face was against the door now. He was sweating. "She won't object. I swear she won't. She won't be able to." "You would have to kill her, I fear," Grady said coldly. "I'll do what I have to do. Just let me out." "You'll give your word on it, sir?" Grady persisted. "My word, my promise, my sacred vow, whatever the hell you want. If you..." There was a flat snap as the bolt was drawn back. The door shivered open a quarter of an inch. Jack's words and breath halted. For a moment he felt that death itself was outside the door. The feeling passed. He whispered, "Thank you, Grady. I swear you won't regret it. I swear you won't." There was no answer. He became aware that all sounds had stopped except for the cold swooping of the wind outside. He pushed the pantry door open. The hinges squealed faintly. The kitchen was empty. Grady was gone. Everything was still and frozen beneath the cold white glare of the fluorescent bars. His eyes caught on the large chopping block, where the three of them had eaten their meals. Standing on top of it was a martini glass, a fifth of gin, and a plastic dish filled with olives. Leaning against it was one of the roque mallets from the equipment shed. He looked at it for a long time. Then a voice, much deeper and more powerful than Grady's, spoke from somewhere, everywhere, from inside him. "Keep your promise, Mr. Torrance." "I will," he said. He heard the fawning servility of his own voice, but was unable to control it. "I will." He walked to the chopping block and put his hand on the handle of the mallet. He hefted it, swung it. It hissed viciously through the air. Jack Torrance began to smile. "Oh boy. Whoa. Oh gosh. Oh, and it looks like we're coming back to the other guy. Oh, this is gonna be a long chapter, but it's okay because I actually like him." Okay. Man, now I'm having to like ration my tea. What is this? Honestly though, the butter is kind of a blessing in disguise because at least it's like giving me the energy. I feel like by now I would have like started to become hungry, but it's like sustaining me a little bit. Okay. Let's see. Chapter 49. 9 chapters to go after this. Halloran going up the country. It was 1:45 in the afternoon, and according to the snow-clouded signs and the Hertz Buick's odometer, he was less than 3 miles from Estes Park, where he finally went off the road. In the hills, the snow was falling faster and more furiously than Halloran had ever seen, which was perhaps not so much a great deal, since Halloran had seen as little snow as he could manage in his lifetime. And the wind was blowing a capricious gale, now from the west, now backing around to the north, sending clouds of powdery snow across his field of vision, making him coldly aware again and again that if he missed a turn he might well plunge 200 feet off the road. The electric cart wheeling ass over teapot as it went down. Making it worse was his own amateur status as a winter driver. It scared him to have the yellow center line buried under swirling, drifting snow, and it scared him when the heavy gusts of wind came unimpeded through the notches in the hills and actually made the heavy Buick slew around. It scared him that the road information signs were mostly masked with snow, and you could flip a coin as to whether the road was going to break right or left up ahead in the white drive-in movie screen he seemed to be driving through. He was scared, all right. He had driven in a cold sweat since climbing into the hills west of Boulder and Lyons, handling the accelerator and brake as if they were Ming vases. Between rock and roll tunes on the radio, the disc jockey constantly adjured motorists to stay off the main highways and under no conditions go into the mountains, because many roads were impassable and all of them were dangerous. Scores of minor accidents had been reported, and 2 serious ones. A party of skiers in a VW microbus, and a family that had been bound for Albuquerque through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The combined score on both was 4 dead and 5 wounded. So stay off those roads and get into the good music here at KTLK, the jock concluded cheerfully, and then compounded Halloran's misery by playing Seasons in the Sun. We had joy, we had fun, we had... Terry Jacks gibbered happily, and Halloran snapped the radio off viciously, knowing he would have it back on in 5 minutes. Oh, that's real. No matter how bad it was better than riding alone through this white madness. Admit it, this here black boy has got at least one long stripe of yaller, and it runs right up his ever-loving back. It wasn't even funny. He would have backed off before he even cleared Boulder if it hadn't been for his compulsion that the boy was in terrible trouble. Even now, a small voice in the back of his skull, more the voice of reason than of cowardice, he thought, was telling him to hole up in an Estes Park motel for the night and wait for the plows to at least expose the center stripe again. That voice kept reminding him of the jet's shaky landing at Stapleton, of that sinking feeling that it was going to come in nose first, delivering its passengers to the gates of hell rather than at Gate 39 Concourse B. But reason would not stand against the compulsion. It had to be today. The snowstorm was his own bad luck. He would have to cope with it. He was afraid that if he didn't, he might have something much worse to cope with in his dreams. The wind gusted again, this time from the northeast. A little English on the ball, if you please. And he was again cut off from the vague shapes of the hills, and even from the embankments on either side of the road. He was driving through white Knoll. And then the high sodium lights of the snowplow loomed out of the soup bearing down, and to his horror he saw that instead of being to one side, the Buick's nose was pointed directly between those headlamps. The plow was being none too choosy about keeping its own side of the road, and Halloran had allowed the Buick to drift. The grinding roar of the plow's diesel engine intruded over the bellow of the wind, and then the sound of its air horn, hard, long, almost deafening. Halloran's that it's like a thing about his like privates, and he's with the fear and all that. His guts seemed to have been transformed into a large mass of silly putty. Color was materializing out of the white now, snow-clotted orange. He could see the high cab, even the gesticulating figure of the driver behind the single long wiper blade. He could see the V shape of the plow's wing blades spewing more snow up into the road's left-hand embankment like pallid smoking dust. Wah! The air horn bellowed indignantly. He squeezed the accelerator like the breast of a much-loved woman, and the Buick scooted forward and toward the right. There was no embankment over here. The plows headed up instead of down, had only to push the snow directly over the top, or over the drop. The drop, ah yes, the drop. The wing blades on Halloran's left, fully 4 feet higher than the Electra's roof, flirted with no more than an inch or two to spare. Until the plow had actually cleared him, Halloran had thought a crash inevitable. A prayer which was half an inarticulate apology to the boy, flitted through his mind like a torn rag. Then the plow was past, its revolving blue lights glinting and flashing in Halloran's rearview mirror. He jockeyed the Buick's steering wheel back to the left, but nothing doing. The scoot had turned into a skid, and the Buick was floating dreamily toward the lip of the drop, spewing? Is that even a word? Like spew and fuming combined? Spewing snow from under its mud guards. He flicked the wheel back the other way in the skid's direction, and the car's front and rear began to swap places. Panicked now, he pumped the brake hard, and then felt a hard bump. In front of him, the road was gone. He was looking into a bottomless chasm of swirling snow and vague greenish-gray pines far away and far below. I'm going, Holy Mother of Jesus, I'm going off! And that was where the car stopped, canting forward at a 30-degree angle. The left fender jammed against the guardrail, the rear wheels nearly off the ground. When Halloran tried to reverse, the wheels only spun helplessly. His heart was doing a Gene Krupa drum roll. He got out. Very carefully he got out, and went around to the Buick's back deck. He was standing there looking at the back wheels helplessly, when a cheerful voice behind him said, "Hello there, fella. You must be shit right out of your mind." He turned around and saw the plow 40 yards further down the road, obscured in the blowing snow except for the raftered dark brown streak of its exhaust and the revolving blue lights on top. The driver was standing just behind him, dressed in a long sheepskin coat and a slicker over it. A blue and white pinstriped engineer's cap was perched on his head, and Halloran could hardly believe it was staying in the teeth of the wind. Glue, it sure God must be glue. "Hi," he said. "Could you pull me back onto the road?" "Well, I guess I could," the plow driver said. "What the hell are you doing up here, mister?" "Good way to kill your ass." "Urgent business." "Nothing is that urgent," the plow driver said slowly and kindly, as if speaking to a mental defective. "If you'd hit that post a little mite harder, nobody would have got you out till April Fool's Day. Don't come from round these parts, do you?" "No, and I wouldn't be here unless my business was as urgent as I say." "That so?" The driver shifted his stance companionably, as if they were having a desultory chat on the back steps, instead of standing in a blizzard halfway between hoot and holler, while Halloran's car balanced 300 feet above the tops of the trees below. "Where are you headed, Estes?" "No, a place called the Overlook Hotel," Halloran said. "It's a little way above Sidewinder." But the driver was shaking his head dolefully. "I guess I know well enough where that is," he said. "Mister, you'll never get up to the old Overlook. Roads between Estes Park and Sidewinder is bloody damn hell. It's drifting in right behind us no matter how hard we push. I come through drifts a few miles back that was damn near 6 feet through the middle. And even if you could make Sidewinder, why, the road's closed from there all the way across to Buckland, Utah. Nope." He shook his head. "Never make it, mister. Never make it at all." "I have to try," Halloran said, calling on his last reserves of patience to keep his voice normal. "There's a boy up there." "Boy? Nah, the Overlook closes down at the last end of September. No percentage keeping it open longer. Too many shit storms like this." "He's the son of the caretaker. He's in trouble." "How would you know that?" His patience snapped. "For Christ's sake, are you going to stand there and flap your jaw at me for the rest of the day? I know. Now are you going to pull me back on the road or not?" "Kinda testy, aren't you?" the driver observed, not particularly perturbed. "Sure, get back in there. I got a chain behind the seat." Halloran got back behind the wheel, beginning to shake with delayed reaction now. His hands were numbed almost clear through. He had forgotten to bring gloves. The plow backed up to the rear of the Buick, and he saw the driver get out with a long coil of chain. Halloran opened the door and shouted, "What can I do to help?" Stay out of the way is all," the driver shouted back. "This ain't gonna take a blink." Which was true. A shudder ran through the Buick's frame as the chain pulled tight, and a second later it was back on the road, pointing more or less toward Estes Park. The plow driver walked up beside the window and knocked on the safety glass. Halloran rolled down the window. "Thanks," he said. "I'm sorry I shouted at you." "I've been shouted at before," the driver said with a grin. "I guess you're sort of strung up. You take these." A pair of bulky blue mittens dropped into Halloran's lap. "You'll need 'em when you go off the road again, I guess. Cold out. You wear 'em unless you want to spend the rest of your life picking your nose with a crocheting hook. And you send 'em back. My wife knitted 'em, and I'm partial to 'em. Name and address is sewed right into the linen. I'm Howard Cottrell, by the way. You just send 'em back when you don't need 'em anymore. And I don't want to have to go paying no hot postage, do you mind?" "All right," Halloran said. "Thanks, one hell of a lot." "You be careful. I take you myself, but I'm as busy as a cat in a mess of guitar strings." "That's okay. Thanks again." He started to roll up the window, but Cottrell stopped him. "When you get to Sidewinder, if you get to Sidewinder, you go to Durkin's Kanoko. It's right next to the library. Can't miss it. You ask for Larry Durkin. Tell him Howie Cottrell sent you, and you want to rent one of his snowmobiles. You mention my name and show those mittens, you'll get the cut rate." "Thanks again," Halloran said. Cottrell nodded. "It's funny. Ain't no way you could know someone's in trouble up there at the Overlook. The phone's out, sure as hell. But I believe you. Sometimes I get feelings. Halloran nodded. Sometimes I do too. Yeah, I know you do. But you take care. I will. Cottrell disappeared into the blowing dimness with a final wave, his engineer cap still mounted perkily on his head. Halloran got going again, the chains flailing at the snow cover on the road, finally digging in enough to start the Buick moving. Behind him, Howard Cottrell gave a final good luck blast on his plow's air horn, although it was really unnecessary. Halloran could feel him wishing him good luck. That's 2 shines in one day, he thought. And that ought to be some kind of good omen. But he just trusted omens, good or bad. And meeting 2 people with a shine in one day, when he usually didn't run across more than 4 or 5 in the course of a year, might not mean anything. That feeling of finality, a feeling like things are all wrapped up, he could not completely define, was still very much with him. It was... The Buick wanted to skid sideways around a tight curve, and Halloran jockeyed it carefully, hardly daring to breathe. He turned on the radio again, and it was Aretha. And Aretha was just Aretha was just fine. He'd share his hurt Buick with her any day. Another gust of wind struck the car, making it rock and slip around. Halloran cursed it and hunched more closely over the wheel. Aretha finished her song and then the jock was on again, telling him that driving today was a good way to get killed. Halloran snapped the radio off. Oh, Lord. Oh, God. I mean, this is a page break, not the end of the chapter just yet, but I'm starting to reconsider. I'm starting to reconsider my my determination tonight. I'm really starting to feel like I could have just split this into 2 parts. I don't know why. It's going on so much longer than I thought it was. I think I might have to I don't know. I mean, at this point, if I were to read the rest of it on another stream, I don't think it would really go on that long to justify a stream, but at the same time, I'm dying over here. For real. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll just finish it, record it off stream at some point. And just upload it on YouTube, I guess. I mean, I'm still gonna finish this chapter, but I really can't go for much longer. My vocal cords are starting to hurt. Okay, let me just take some tea. Okay. He did make it to Sidewinder, although he was 4.5 hours on the road between Estes Park and there. By the time he got to the upland highway, it was full dark, but the snowstorm showed no signs of abating. Twice he'd had to stop in front of drifts that were as high as his car's hood and wait for the plows to come along and knock holes in them. At one of the drifts, the plow had come close up his side of the road, and there had been another close call. The driver had merely swung around his car, not getting out to chew the fat, but he did deliver 1 or 2 finger gestures that all Americans above the age of 10 recognize, and it was not the peace sign. It seemed that as he drew closer to the Overlook, he needed to hurry. His need to hurry became more and more compulsive. He found himself glancing at his wristwatch almost constantly. The hands seemed to be flying along. 10 minutes later, after he had turned onto the upland, he passed 2 signs. The whooping wind had cleared both of their snowpacks, so he was able to read them. Sidewinder 10, the first said. The second, road closed 12 miles ahead during winter months. Larry Durkin, Halloran muttered to himself. His dark face was strained and tense in the muted green glow of the dashboard instruments. It was 10 after 6. The Kanoko by the library. Larry. And that was when it struck him full force. The smell of oranges and the thought force, heavy and hateful, murderous. Oh gosh. Oh, that is a racist tirade. Get out of here, you dirty expletive. This is none of your business, you expletive. Turn around, or we'll kill you, hang you up from a tree limb, you. And then burn the... Oh, gosh. I can't read the rest of that. Halloran screamed in the close confines of his car. The message did not come to him in words, but in a series of rebus-like images that were slammed into his head with terrific force. He took his hands from the steering wheel to blot the pictures out. Then the car smashed broadside into one of the embankments, rebounded, slewed halfway around, then came to a stop. The rear wheels spun uselessly. Halloran snapped the gear shift into park and then covered his face with his hands. He did not precisely cry. What escaped him was an even sound. His chest heaved. He knew that if that blast had taken him on a stretch of road with a drop-off on one side or another, he might well be dead now. Maybe that had been the idea, and it might hit him again at any time. He would have to protect against it. He was surrounded by a red force of immense power that might have been memory. He was drowning in instinct. He took his hands away from his face and opened his eyes cautiously. Nothing. If there was something trying to scare him again, it wasn't getting through. He was closed off. Had that happened to the boy? Dear God, had that happened to the little boy? And all of the images, the one that bothered... out of all the images, the one that bothered him the most was the dull whacking sound, like a hammer splattering into thick cheese. What did that mean? Jesus, not that little boy. Jesus, please. He dropped the gear shift lever to low range and fed the engine gas a little at a time. The wheels spun and caught again. The Buick began to move, its headlights cutting weakly through the swirling snow. He looked at his watch. Almost 6:30 now. And he was beginning to feel that it was very late indeed. Okay. I think I'm gonna have to read the last, like, what is it, like 8 chapters? I'm probably just gonna like read them offline and then like record it and then like post it on YouTube. Cause I like my voice is at its limit. I can't go any further. I'll probably do it like tomorrow and just like upload it and that sort of thing. But I honestly doubt we have like the manpower for a raid right now. Let me see. Stream manager. Oh gosh. I guess this is a good time to drink the rest of my tea. Yep. It seems like that's enough. I mean I mean that's enough for like me. Not enough for a raid, but like enough of my stream. So, yeah. We're doing the cooking stream on Friday. If only the rest of the book's plot moved this fast. I know, right? But yeah, we're doing the cooking stream on Friday, and then Saturday we're doing more House Flipper. It took me a second to remember that, but yeah. So that's gonna be it for me. I need to go to bed and like rest. So I hope everyone has a good morning, evening, afternoon, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And I love you.